Every seventh crime on Earth happens within families, and over 38% of these are committed by men. Moreover, domestic violence is most prevalent in developed countries. Approximately 50% of all women who die violent deaths are killed by their husbands or partners, highlighting the critical need to protect women from domestic crimes. But why does a woman's desire for a strong man by her side sometimes lead her straight into the hands of a monster? Maybe it's because some are willing to have that strong shoulder at any cost. After all, society and family teach us that a woman needs a man by her side. We are raised that way. And then, some women end up enduring violence. This happened in 2012. Ekaterina Gurova was just 26 years old, and her killer is already out of prison and back in Izhevsk. Let's dive into a new story. Izhevsk is a large industrial city in the Russian Federation and is a scientific, educational, and cultural center of the Volga region. Located west of the Ural Mountains, this capital of Udmurtia is renowned for its weapons manufacturing and engineering industries. When visiting, one can admire the city's architecture, experience Udmurt culture, and explore the famous Izhevsk Museum. Back in her hometown, Ekaterina Gurova's life wasn't going great. She had gone through a tough divorce, had no prospects, and was raising a young child alone. Feeling drained and defeated, she decided to start over. She moved with her daughter from Naberezhnya Chelny to Izhevsk, a new city, new experiences, new people. The change brought color back into her life. Ekaterina found work she loved, established herself in the beauty industry, and even had plans to open her own salon. Things were going well, except her personal life wasn't coming together. Despite her striking looks and constant attention from men, Ekaterina wasn't in a hurry to trust anyone. She avoided dating and threw herself into her work, until Alexei Tatarkin appeared in her life. They first met in 2007. Alexei worked as a taxi driver. Being noticed by such an attractive woman as Katya was flattering for him, so he turned up the charm. He told Ekaterina that driving a taxi was just a side gig and that by day he was a system administrator for several major companies, with 2 degrees in system administration and economics. By this time, Ekaterina was standing on her own 2 feet and didn't need financial support, but the fact that he was educated and seemed ambitious intrigued her. For a while, they kept things strictly friendly. Then, when her ex-husband's business needed a system administrator, Ekaterina thought of Alexei. He got the job, and from that moment, Alexei started to be more involved in her life, driving her and her child to daycare, fixing her computer, walking her dog, and even taking her to visit her parents back in Naberezhnya Chelny. But even with all this attention from Alexei, Katya saw it as just a friend helping out. So, he decided to change his tactics to win her heart. He began to play on her sympathy. One day, Alexei put on quite a show outside the office where Ekaterina worked. He was in tears, telling her he'd caught his wife with another man, and that his wife's aunt had even told him that the kids he thought were his weren't. Even though the whole scene seemed pretty ridiculous, Katya felt empathy for him and offered her support. Alexei kept pulling the sympathy card, claiming that he'd served in Chechnya, was wounded in the head there, and that sometimes he'd go to the funerals of his fallen comrades. The hardships of his life touched something in Ekaterina's heart, and she couldn't just leave him alone. But he finally won her over when he went to Moscow for surgery to remove a bullet supposedly lodged in his head. Alexei called her from the train station, saying he had passed out, and someone had stolen his money and documents. The compassionate Katya rushed to help him, brought him home, and took care of him for an entire week. It was after this incident that they started dating. Unfortunately, only a fraction of what Alexei had told her was true. The rest was a complete fabrication, but at the time, Ekaterina, smitten and unaware, couldn't see through the lies. Relationships built on deception rarely have a future, and problems in their relationship began almost immediately. Once, Alexei took the last 1,000 rubles from Ekaterina's purse just to buy her roses. He didn't seem to care that she was left with no money to even buy food for herself and her child. As time went on, Alexei started persuading Katya to move in together, and after much persistence, she finally agreed. But another surprise awaited her. Alexei suggested they get married. He applied to the registry office 3 times, but Ekaterina kept refusing. Once again, he resorted to dramatic gestures. Alexei Tatarkin would twist his arms in despair, saying he had no one else in the world, and if she turned him down again, he'd end his life. Ekaterina finally gave in, and on August 30th, 2011, their marriage was officially registered. Ekaterina's mother didn't like Alexei from the start. She found him unreliable and felt he wasn't a good match for her daughter. Several times over the phone, she even asked him not to pressure Katya if she wasn't ready to get married. But then one day, she got a call from her daughter. "Mom, I don't know how to say this. We got married." She tried to lighten the mood by joking, "Maybe getting divorced the second time won't be as scary as the first." After the wedding, their life together didn't get any better. They kept arguing about money. Just 2 months after they were married, Alexei Tatarkin started getting heavily involved in Ekaterina's business affairs. He sold the Kamaz trucks she got as part of the property division from her first marriage. With the money, they took a trip to Moscow and bought 3 used foreign cars to fix up and resell later. But in the end, they only got paid for 2 of the cars, and the money for the third seemed to vanish into thin air. Alexei insisted that he'd been scammed, but Ekaterina wasn't buying it anymore. She demanded that he either return the money or give her a car of equal value. Eventually, he wrote her a promissory note for 400,000 rubles, which Katya took to her mother and asked her to keep, just in case. It's worth noting that Ekaterina worked incredibly hard to support the family. She had an extremely busy schedule, sometimes taking on 10 to 12 clients a day and staying at work until as late as 1 a.m. She was paying off the car loan, covering daycare expenses, buying clothes for herself, her daughter and her new husband, paying for gas, car parts, her advanced training courses, and other daily expenses. But whenever Katya tried to talk to Alexei about finances, she'd end up facing another jealous outburst from him, complete with accusations about her living an inappropriate lifestyle. She often told her friends and her mom that she was going to get a divorce and admitted the marriage had been a mistake. But getting Alexei Tatarkin to leave her apartment was nearly impossible. By mid-February 2012, they finally separated, but their arguments continued. Ekaterina Gurova filed for divorce, and just a few days later she disappeared. On May 27, 2012, Ekaterina Gurova, a well-known beauty expert in Izhevsk, was reported missing. On May 28th, Ekaterina's mother decided to call Alexei. She didn't like him and didn't want to reach out, but Ekaterina hadn't answered her phone since the night before and hadn't called back, something that had never happened before. Alexei calmly said he didn't know where Katya was and even promised to check her apartment. But her mother knew Alexei Tatarkin wasn't telling the whole truth. That same day, she managed to find the number of her daughter's friend and reached out to her. From Naberezhnya Chelny, she called local morgues and hospitals and filed a missing person report with the police. The moment she heard the news, Ekaterina's mother rushed to Izhevsk. The apartment her daughter had been renting was locked, and her car was still parked in the courtyard. From that moment on, one of the largest search operations in the city's history began. Katya's friends tried to piece together what might have happened on the day she vanished. According to them, around 2 p.m., she was seen sitting in a cafe with a man. This information supposedly came from one of the waitresses. Afterward, Katya drove home in her car. Security cameras near her building showed that around 3:40 p.m., she parked in the courtyard and went inside. What happened next remains a mystery. Her car stayed in the parking lot, but Katya disappeared without a trace. Katya's mother mentioned that she tried calling her around 6 p.m. The phone rang, but Katya didn't answer. By 11 p.m., her phone was turned off and no one could reach her. Her loved ones insisted that Katya would never just leave town without telling anyone, even if it was for a short trip. On May 30th, 2012, the investigative department of the Pervomaisky district in Izhevsk, under the investigative committee of the Russian Federation for the Udmurt Republic, launched a criminal case under Part 1 of Article 105 of the Russian Criminal Code, Crime, concerning Ekaterina Gurova's mysterious disappearance. The investigative committee of the Russian Federation for the Udmurt Republic took special control over the investigation. The search continued, and even a month later, Ekaterina was still nowhere to be found. The entire city of Izhevsk was searching for Ekaterina. Flyers with her photo were posted everywhere. Her friends even reached out to psychics for help. Dozens of volunteers, including her friends, acquaintances, and clients, teamed up with the police to search for her. They combed through the suburbs and different parts of the city based on tips from witnesses, but there were still no leads. Despite the tireless efforts of the police and volunteers, no progress was made. So Ekaterina's mother, Olga Gurova, filed complaints with every possible agency in Udmurtia, the republic's prosecutor, and even reached out to the president of Russia, Vladimir Putin. She received replies from all the offices stating that her letters had been registered. Only after this did the investigators start showing some renewed interest in the case. Ekaterina's husband was a prime suspect. He had been extremely jealous, and Ekaterina believed he was behind the disappearance of her documents right before their divorce. However, Alexei swore he had nothing to do with Katya's disappearance and claimed he didn't know anything. Right after she went missing, he was detained, questioned, and then released. Alexei then withdrew from the world, turned off his phone, and refused to communicate with anyone. The search continued. Proving Alexei Tatarkin's involvement in Katya's disappearance wasn't easy. The break came thanks to a waitress who'd withdrawn money from Katya's card at Alexei's request. When she saw the missing person posters a few days later, she contacted Katya's mother. Additionally, testimony from a neighbor helped the case. The neighbor had heard a scream coming from Katya's apartment. Other witnesses reported seeing Alexei driving Katya's car on the day she disappeared. The police seized the car, and during the investigation, they found traces of Ekaterina's blood inside. The forensic results came back in early July. By July 10th, Alexei Tatarkin was arrested. He kept insisting he had nothing to do with his wife's disappearance. He would put on a show during questioning, claiming he felt unwell, and we had to call an ambulance, recalled Yevgeny Fedorov, the lead investigator for high-priority cases with the investigative committee of the Russian Federation for Udmurtia. But the doctors couldn't find anything wrong with him, and there was no documented proof that he'd had a minor stroke, as he claimed. On July 12th, during yet another interrogation, he suddenly confessed to killing his wife. Alexei said he confessed because he was terrified. According to him, Ekaterina had been appearing to him in his dreams every night, talking to him and driving him insane. His confession came as a tragic gift on the eve of what would have been her birthday. On July 13th, the murdered Ekaterina Gurova would have turned 27, but even after confessing, he continued to mislead the investigation. One moment, he claimed he committed the crime on the banks of the Kama River, and the next, he couldn't remember where he hid the remains. There were many odd details in the case of the young woman's disappearance, but the painstaking work of investigators helped piece together the sequence of events leading up to the crime against Ekaterina Gurova. The last person to see Katya alive was one of her students, Alina. They met at a cafe around 2 or 3 p.m. on May 27th. She wanted to open a beauty salon, Alina recalled. She wanted to hire me. We had just started talking when Katya's phone rang. From what I understood, the caller told her that someone had posted her personal messages online. Katya tried to check the internet on her phone but couldn't access anything. She said she was going home and would be back in about 30 minutes. She asked me to wait for her, the witness said. On her way home, Katya called her husband. They were already in the process of getting a divorce, and she suspected he was the one who had posted her messages, as he was very tech-savvy. She arranged to meet him at the building on Udmurtskaya Street, 161, where she'd been renting an apartment for the past 2 months after they'd separated. According to Alexei Tatarkin, they met in the building's entryway, and an argument broke out almost immediately. Katya accused him of leaking her personal messages with another man. In response, Alexei launched into accusations of his own. I asked my wife if the rumors I'd heard about her seeing other men were true. Her response basically implied I'd be an idiot not to have figured it out by now, Alexei told investigators. Without thinking, I grabbed a knife and stabbed Katya in the chest. After the stab, Katya collapsed to the floor. I caught her. I sat there on the floor with Katya lying on my knees. I stayed like that for about 10 minutes, and then she stopped showing signs of life. When I came to my senses, I realized I had taken her life. I took the knife and began dismembering the body to cover my tracks. A neighbor of Ekaterina's reported hearing a woman scream that lasted about 5 minutes. It sounded muffled at times, as if someone was covering her mouth. Afterward, the sound of running water could be heard in the bathroom for several hours. What Alexei Tatarkin did next was far from the behavior of someone acting in a blind rage. It seemed like everything he did was carefully calculated to create a perfect alibi. He didn't call an ambulance or attempt to save his wife. Instead, he cold-bloodedly dismembered her body into 9 pieces and packed them into garbage bags. Afterward, he sent 2 text messages from Katya's phone to his own, one saying she had gone for a drive and another saying she'd call him the next day. That same evening, he used her laptop to send messages pretending to be her, further throwing the investigation off track. Around 9 p.m., he took the bags outside and loaded them into a car he had received from a client for repairs the day before. He buried some of the remains near the village of Chilton and left the rest at a landfill near the village of Vozhhoy in the Zavyalovsky district. After that, he calmly went home and continued watching as the entire city searched for the woman he had already buried. The official funeral for Ekaterina Gurova took place on July 17, 2012. She was laid to rest in a closed casket. First, a memorial service was held for her in Izhevsk, and then the hearse transported her coffin to Naberezhnya Chelny. Katya's family chose to bury her next to her father's grave. Many of her father's former colleagues came to say their goodbyes to Ekaterina and shared stories about how much he had adored his Tatyunya. Valery Gurov had worked for many years as an anesthesiologist at the perinatal center, but in October 2008, at just 45 years old, he passed away suddenly from cancer. Ekaterina left behind a 6-year-old daughter named Nastya, so why did her husband decide to confess to the crime a month and a half later? Katya's mother, Olga Gurova, suspected that even his confession was part of a calculated plan. She believed he waited just long enough so that the remains wouldn't be able to reveal exactly how the crime had been committed. There's plenty of information online about how, where, and at what rate a human body decomposes. It's possible that Alexei Tatarkin timed everything and only revealed the body when it was too late to determine how many wounds he inflicted or the exact way he attacked Katya. And what about the motive? Was it really just jealousy, or were there other reasons? If we go back to the beginning of their relationship, it's clear that their biggest fights were always about money. And indeed, Alexei Tatarkin had a complicated relationship with money. For example, according to Olga Gurova, Katya would give him the money to make monthly payments on her car loan. But starting in May 2011, those payments stopped. Meanwhile, Alexei kept promising Katya that he would soon pay off the loan entirely. Even during the investigation, he continued to insist that he'd been making regular payments out of his own pocket and that he'd given all the receipts to Katya. But in November 2011, a collection agency that had purchased the debt from the bank called a number listed in their database, which turned out to be Alexei's. He told them that his wife had been in a car accident, was in the hospital and couldn't speak, but promised they would start paying off the loan soon. He managed to drag this out until May 2012. After Katya's death, he told them that now he was the one in the hospital. Money issues were at the root of most of the major arguments in their relationship. Katya was unhappy with the fact that Alexei didn't have a steady source of income, but seemed to have endless expenses for what he claimed were business ventures. Gurova and Tatarkin were complete opposites. She was open and honest, while he was cunning and greedy. And to top it off, he was extremely jealous. To be fair, there was some basis for Tatarkin's jealousy. During the trial, Alexei's friends testified that he had repeatedly asked them to spy on his wife. During one of these stakeouts, they caught Ekaterina flirting with another man. Moreover, with his background as a system administrator and computer expert, Alexei secretly monitored her social media messages, which only fueled his jealousy further. Alexei Tatarkin could be described as emotionally unstable, and any concern he showed for Ekaterina was just an act. The investigation also revealed that Alexei didn't have a college degree at all. He hadn't even finished one course of study, and he had never served in the military, let alone in Chechnya, as he had claimed. The entire criminal case was documented in 7 thick volumes, containing testimony from dozens of witnesses, results from multiple forensic reports, and descriptions of investigative actions. To recap, Ekaterina Gurova disappeared on the night of May 27th last year. For a month and a half, not only her family and the police, but also teams of volunteers searched for her, combing through nearby forests, checking basements, and exploring abandoned buildings. From the court verdict, one witness stated, Tatarkin constantly picked fights and argued with Gurova. Before they got married, Gurova had decided to withdraw her marriage application, and in response, Tatarkin attempted suicide. In February 2012, Gurova left Tatarkin and started living separately. In early May, Tatarkin pretended to have a stroke. Their divorce hearing was scheduled for June 6, 2012. Gurova trusted Tatarkin to handle her loan payments. From Tatarkin's own testimony, "I put the body parts in trash bags and carried them to my car, a Vaz 21053. Then I drove to the village of Nechkino. I took the bags with Gurova's body parts from the trunk and tried to sink them in the river, but they wouldn't sink. I tied bags of bricks with rope to the torso, but they came loose. After that, I drove from Nechkino back toward Izhevsk." When he returned to the apartment, Tatarkin cleaned the floors and wiped away the blood. He gathered the blood-stained items in a bag and, along with the rest of the body parts in other bags, placed them back in the car. At that moment, he noticed a message had popped up on Gurova's laptop from one of her friends. Pretending to be Ekaterina, he replied that she had supposedly gone out of town for a drive. To create an alibi for himself, the killer also sent 2 text messages from her phone to his own, saying that Katya was asking him not to worry and that she would definitely call him back the next day. From the testimony of the accused, Tatarkin, "I left the torso in a wooded area on the left side of the road. I covered the bags with leaves but didn't bury them. The bags were about 30 yards apart. I left the sweater I was wearing at the time of the crime there as well. Then I drove to Zavyalovo, onto the Sarapolsky Highway, and after reaching the sign for Stary Chiltum, I turned right and buried the remaining body parts along with the clothes." As the witness statements were being read in court, Ekaterina's mother, Olga, became overwhelmed. Unable to contain her sobs, she had to step out into the hallway where paramedics were called for her. The judge took nearly an hour and a half to read the verdict. Alexei Tatarkin was sentenced to 9 years and 6 months in a maximum security penal colony. The prosecutor had requested a 10-year sentence. There was no appeal. Neither Ekaterina Gurova's family lawyer nor her mother was present for the sentencing. None of Alexei's relatives attended either. Attached to the criminal case was a claim for damages, where Ekaterina's mother requested 5 million rubles for emotional distress. She also submitted documents seeking reimbursement for funeral expenses totaling 30,000 rubles. The court approved reimbursement of funeral expenses. However, regarding the 5 million rubles in emotional compensation, the court suggested that Ekaterina's mother file a separate civil lawsuit. As the verdict was being read, Alexei Tatarkin's face remained expressionless. The one thing he seemed relieved about was that Katya had stopped appearing in his dreams. It's heartbreaking to think of this wonderful woman who never got the chance to escape from the monster she married. With her kind and hopeful nature, Ekaterina saw light where there was only darkness, and she failed to see the evil in Alexei. Maybe the problem is that from a young age, women are told they absolutely need a man by their side, that without him, they're somehow incomplete. This mindset leads to a kind of self-esteem that makes it easy to end up married to whoever comes along. How little must she have valued herself to let a man stay in her life who couldn't even buy her flowers with his own money and had to steal from her purse? Why are we, as women, so blind? Katya realized early on that he was a phony, not a real man. A loving man would protect his woman, would make her happy with even the smallest gifts, just to see her smile. But by then, Katya was already trapped in his snare, one she couldn't escape alive. In 2022, Alexei Tatarkin was released and returned to Izhevsk. So much for justice. But we're not the ones who write the laws or make the decisions. What we can do is learn from stories like this. This case should serve as a warning to beautiful, successful women, those who are so confident in themselves and the goodness of the world that they end up choosing someone who seems like a devoted servant, a reliable partner, a simple guy who manages to worm his way into your life. You trust him with everything, your children, your property, thinking he's so loyal. But sooner or later, that same guy will stab you in the back because deep down, he knows he'll never reach or experience the success you have, and that realization will eat away at his ego, slowly and painfully. Justice comes from above, and sooner or later this criminal will face it. Imagine a quiet, peaceful life in a small town where everyone knows each other and evening strolls feel safe and familiar. But what if behind the walls of a house you pass by every day, something dark is hiding? What if the person everyone thought was kind and predictable suddenly vanishes without a trace and her own home becomes her final resting place? Gloria Gary was a woman whose life revolved around books, mysteries, and novels. She lived in solitude, and it seemed like the only thing that truly mattered to her were the characters in her favorite stories. But one day, she simply disappeared. 9 days had passed since she was last seen. Her family and the police searched her home, every room, the attic, and the basement, but found nothing. How could this be? How does someone vanish from their own home? Now imagine that just days after her disappearance, a young man is found, and he admits to having been in Gloria's house. He claims that her body is there, but no one can find it. Where did it go? And how could a young man who appears so innocent and on the verge of tears during questioning be involved in such a terrifying crime? Are you ready to dive deeper into this story? This tale will challenge everything you think is safe. Prepare yourself. Darkness often hides where you least expect it. A red Honda was parked on a deserted highway in northern Utah, catching the attention of the few cars that passed by. One driver, noticing that it hadn't moved, didn't approach but immediately called emergency services, suspecting the driver might be in trouble. The area was remote, surrounded by fields and farms, and there wasn't a soul in sight. When the officer arrived at the scene, he saw the lone car parked on the shoulder and cautiously approached it, leaving his patrol car with the lights flashing behind him. As soon as he got close, the door of the Honda swung open, and out stepped a young man holding a gas can. He looked quite young, though his ID showed he was already 22. The young man explained that he had run out of gas and didn't have money to refuel, so he was just waiting, hoping someone would stop and share some fuel. While checking the car's registration, the officer noticed something odd. The car belonged to a 40-year-old woman named Gloria Gary, who had been reported missing for several days. This fact raised the officer's suspicion, and he took the young man, named Kyle Jepson, to the station for questioning. Jepson claimed he knew where Gloria was, but his statements seemed strange. He insisted that she was still in her house, even though her family had already searched every corner and found nothing. It felt like Kyle was hiding something, and the police had to figure out what that was. The story of Gloria's disappearance began several days earlier, on January 3rd, when she was last seen. She had left work at Urban Daily, stopped by a local pizzeria to grab some takeout, and headed home. But the next day she didn't show up for work. Her colleagues initially joked that Gloria must have overslept, which was extremely unusual for her. However, when no one had seen her by evening, a growing sense of unease began to spread. Something was wrong. On January 4th, Gloria was supposed to meet her family for dinner, but she never arrived. She wasn't answering her phone, and her relatives started to worry. But it wasn't until January 5th, when she missed work again and no one could reach her, that her family and co-workers became alarmed. They knew Gloria as a reliable and punctual person, someone who always stuck to her schedule and never disappeared without warning. The police immediately began a search. Her family checked her home but found no trace of her. Everything pointed to Gloria having vanished without leaving a single clue. Neighbors described her as a quiet, polite woman who always lived by the rules and never drew attention to herself. She was a devoted aunt to her nieces, a loving daughter and sister, and someone for whom routine and planning were essential. Yet despite her seemingly perfect life, no one could explain what had happened or why she had gone missing. When the police found her car abandoned on the side of a highway, hundreds of miles from her home, the mystery only deepened. What had taken Gloria so far away from the life she knew? Meanwhile, at the police station, Kyle maintained that Gloria was still at her house. But this contradicted all the evidence they had. Officers began to suspect that Kyle was either hiding something or possibly involved in her disappearance. How could a woman whose life was so meticulously organized simply vanish without leaving a single clue? Each day, it became harder to believe that all of this had happened to a woman who lived such a simple, predictable life. Gloria was described as having black hair and brown eyes, often wearing glasses with thin frames. She was last seen in a long dark sweater and pants. Her bright red Honda was also noted, as its vibrant color made it stand out. Gloria's family was not idle. They began spreading the word about her disappearance through social media and local news outlets, handing out flyers with her photo, and creating a dedicated account for tips from those who didn't want to involve the police. They were doing everything they could, hoping for a miracle. But deep down, they were preparing for the worst. Their efforts paid off. A few days later, Gloria's red Honda was spotted in southern Utah, in a small town called Pound. Around noon on January 12th, local officers patrolling the area noticed the car parked at a convenience store. They checked the license plate and confirmed it was the missing vehicle. However, when the patrol returned to investigate further, the car was gone. Realizing they had missed an important lead, the officers reviewed the store's security footage. They managed to capture a glimpse of a man driving the car. The video quality was poor, but it was clear he had some dark markings on his arm that resembled either a glove or a tattoo. When Gloria's family saw the images of the suspect, they were baffled. None of them knew anyone in Utah, adding another layer of mystery. Determined to act quickly, the police circulated photos of the man on social media, putting out an alert for his identification. The very next day, January 13th, luck finally turned in favor of the investigation. A passing driver spotted the red Honda parked on a rural road and called the police to report the vehicle. Soon, a patrol was dispatched to the scene. Upon arrival, the officer noticed that the car's windows were fogged, as if someone had been inside for a while. The body of the car had been partially spray-painted black, and the passenger window was broken and taped up. The officer immediately relayed the license plate number to dispatch and approached the vehicle for a closer look. At that moment, the door opened, and a young man emerged, holding a gas can, pretending everything was under control. The young man claimed that he had run out of gas and told a story about waiting for help. His hands were covered in black paint, which raised suspicion. The officer noticed this and asked why the passenger window was taped up. The young man, looking flustered, gave a shaky explanation about breaking it in a fit of anger with a machete. Not convinced, the officer requested that he step out of the vehicle for a search. When the patrol officer searched the young man and found no weapons, he placed him in the back seat of the patrol car and drove him to the station. Meanwhile, a radio dispatch revealed that the Honda belonged to a missing woman from Iowa. The officer asked the young man who owned the car, and he insisted it belonged to his aunt. However, when asked her name, he couldn't remember. Realizing his lie had failed, the young man confessed to stealing the car. He explained that he had noticed it parked in a driveway and decided to take advantage of the situation. Utah police, having obtained a search warrant for the red Honda found on the highway, immediately began a thorough examination. What they found inside looked like a collection of items for someone planning an extended trip or escape. A tent, toothbrushes, men's clothing, blankets, spray paint, and tape. Everything suggested that the young driver, Kyle Jepson, was preparing to go into hiding and spend time away from civilization. When Kyle was brought into the station, he acted strangely. Initially, he agreed to talk without a lawyer, but then, visibly anxious, changed his mind. Detectives quickly discovered that Jepson had an outstanding warrant in Iowa for burglary. At first, it seemed he was just a car thief who had fled his home state, but his nervous demeanor put the officers on high alert. When they asked him about Gloria Gary, the owner of the Honda, his response shocked everyone. Kyle unexpectedly admitted that he had seen Gloria. Moreover, he claimed that she was still in her home. But then, as if reconsidering, he fell silent and refused to elaborate further. Only after some time, when the detectives pressed for clarification, did Jepson gather his thoughts and say that Gloria was dead and her body was still in the house. The officer, who had come merely to check on a vehicle, suddenly found himself entangled in a serious investigation. Detectives in Iowa, having received this information, contacted the police in Utah. When Kyle was brought in for questioning, his confessions were even more chilling than investigators had anticipated. He admitted that on January 3rd, he had no intention of harming anyone. He had simply been wandering the streets of Des Moines when he stumbled upon Gloria's house. According to him, it was a chance encounter that led him there. He broke in and hid, waiting for the homeowner to return. When Gloria came home carrying a pizza box, she had no idea that an intruder was lurking inside. Kyle attacked her, knocking her to the floor. Fear and rage were evident in his eyes. He choked her and didn't let go until she went quiet. At first, he thought she had merely passed out, but then he realized Gloria was no longer breathing. What happened next was even more shocking. Kyle violated her in an attempt to regain a sense of control that he so desperately craved. Kyle described his actions with an unsettling detachment, insisting that at that moment he felt as if he were watching himself from outside, as if it wasn't really him. He claimed everything felt unreal, and despite the gravity of his actions, he felt no remorse. After the crime, Kyle stayed in Gloria's house. He didn't try to flee right away. Instead, he acted as if nothing had happened. He took a shower, watched TV, and even sent a few messages and photos to his friends on Snapchat. He didn't specify what was in those photos, but some of his friends began to express concern. After spending a few days in the house, Kyle decided to take $200 in cash that he found and steal Gloria's red Honda, setting off on a journey through several states. Throughout this time, despite his confession, he attempted to convey the impression that he didn't fully grasp the seriousness of what he had done. He was apprehended, arrested, and placed in a detention center in Utah while awaiting extradition to Iowa. However, one question remained. If Gloria was truly dead, where was her body? Gloria's family, who had reported her missing, had searched her house several times without finding any clues. Even after the investigation began, Iowa detectives visited the house to inspect the premises, but without a warrant. They had no authority to force open doors or search locked spaces like the attic, basement, or closets. They could only walk through the main rooms, visually inspecting the house. When Kyle claimed that Gloria's body was still in the house, the police had many questions. Why didn't her family or the officers themselves find anything suspicious during the search? And if Kyle was telling the truth, why had the body not been found? These questions demanded immediate answers, and a warrant for a full-blown search of the house was promptly executed. When Gloria Gary went missing, her family didn't know what to think. It had been 9 days since she disappeared, and any hope for her well-being was fading. But Kyle Jepson's unexpected admission that he had left her body in the house caused police to refocus their efforts on the investigation. Authorities had finally obtained a full search warrant for the house, and now, armed with that document, they could proceed without restraint. When detectives re-entered Gloria's home, they began examining every room, attic, and basement. It turned out that Gloria suffered from hoarding syndrome and her home was cluttered, making the search difficult. In every corner were boxes, old magazines, and items she hadn't used in a long time. Police officers, picking their way through this chaos, finally discovered the body. The remains were sent for autopsy, and forensics confirmed the worst. It was indeed Gloria Gary. Police did not disclose the exact location where the body was found, citing the privacy of the deceased, only saying that the body had been hidden quite skillfully amidst the unusual arrangement of the house. The discovery left many questions, and no one could explain how the body could have gone unnoticed for so long. The residents of Des Moines, where Gloria lived, were shocked. Their quiet and safe neighborhood had suddenly become the center of a sinister story. Des Moines, a major transportation and financial center in Iowa, was known for its safety. But 2017 brought a wave of violence to the city. In the first few days of the year, several homicides were reported at once. What made the incidents particularly disturbing was that they occurred in previously safe neighborhoods like Merrill Hay, where Gloria lived. Residents began installing security systems and fearing for their lives, and it all started with Kyle Jepson. As it later turned out, it wasn't the first time Kyle had been on the police's radar. 5 days before Gloria's death, on December 29, 2016, he broke into the home of Lacey Taylor, a woman who lived on Holcomb Avenue. When Taylor returned from work at 8:30 p.m., she caught Jepson in her kitchen. The young man was dressed in her underwear and wig, and on the table was her food and wine, which he had eaten and drunk. Despite the frightening situation, Taylor managed to pull herself together and screamed, demanding that the intruder get out. To her surprise, Jepson complied, throwing his things on the floor and running away. Later, Taylor looked out the window and recognized him as her neighbor's son. She immediately called the police and reported the trespassing. Although Kyle hadn't stolen anything, she was concerned about the young man's strange behavior. The police issued a warrant for his arrest, but Jepson had already gone on the run. The incident shook Taylor and her family. Shortly afterward, she decided to move out of Des Moines, fearing that their home might be targeted again. When word got out about Gloria Gary's death, Taylor realized her fears were not in vain. A few days after her home invasion, Jepson found himself involved in the death of another woman. When Gloria's body was found, Kyle was charged with first-degree murder, as well as theft and burglary. His bail was set at $1 million in cash, but the story didn't end there. It turned into a tragedy for two families at once. On the one hand, the loss of Gloria's family, a woman who lived quietly and modestly, and on the other, a nightmare for Kyle's parents. After learning about the crime committed by their son, they were in a state of shock. Imagine this. You are parents who watched your son grow up, proud of his accomplishments and loving him more than anything. Then one day you find out that this son, your son, has taken another person's life. How do you live with that? How do you find the answer to where you made a mistake? What was the moment when these horrible thoughts started in your son's mind? All indications were that Jepson had been hiding his dark side for a long time. He worked in a pub just 10 minutes from Gloria's house. His co-workers described him as a diligent and friendly guy, but that all changed after he was fired. He became withdrawn and, according to friends, disappeared from view more and more often. When Gloria's family was handing out flyers with her picture on them, they went to the very pub where Jepson had once worked and asked for her picture to be put up in a prominent place. One of the employees taped it to a window pane. This seemingly ordinary act later shocked everyone when it was revealed that it was the former employee of the establishment who turned out to be the culprit. Gloria's family could not believe that their loved one had been killed by someone who was very close by. The pub staff were equally shocked when they found out that their former colleague, someone they once shared shifts and conversations with, turned out to be a criminal. No one could believe that Kyle, who had always seemed like an ordinary guy, was capable of such an act. The legal proceedings, which concluded in September 2017, marked the final chapter in a case that shook the entire city of Des Moines and its surroundings. Kyle Jepson, a 22-year-old offender, agreed to a plea deal to avoid a harsher sentence. This took time, as his lawyers attempted to use the intimate nature of his actions against Gloria Gary and Alicia Taylor as mitigating circumstances, but the court was unyielding. Gloria was someone everyone spoke of with kindness and respect, and her elderly father couldn't bring himself to attend the trial. He refused to face the person responsible for taking his only daughter from him. Jepson, on the other hand, tried to explain his behavior, claiming that certain demons had taken over his mind, making him lose control of his actions. However, his tears during the trial didn't move the judge or anyone else present. A psychiatric evaluation found no mental illness. He was declared fully competent. The sentence handed down by the court was severe. Jepson received 50 years for the crime against Gloria Gary, along with an additional 10 years for the break-in at Taylor's home. The judge ordered that the sentences be served consecutively, meaning Jepson would have to serve at least 35 years before being eligible for parole. The public was satisfied with the court's decision, but lingering questions remained. One such question was how Gloria's body, which had been in her home, went unnoticed for more than 9 days. Even though her family and the police had searched the house, authorities declined to comment, citing respect for the family's privacy. However, Some details emerged through interviews with Gloria's relatives. It was revealed that Gloria had been dealing with hoarding tendencies. Her love for books, novels, and mystery thrillers had taken over her home. When she ran out of space on her shelves, she began stacking them on windowsills, tables, and eventually on the floor. Over time, her home became a maze of books, making it nearly impossible to find anything. After her death, Jepson simply covered her body with these books, concealing it under layers of paperbacks and hardcovers. It turned out that the very world of books she cherished became her final resting place, and that's why her family, unaware of where to look, had passed by without realizing. Gloria Gary was a humble and kind-hearted person who simply loved to escape into the world of her books. She didn't deserve such a tragic end. Her home was a sanctuary of comfort and peace, but as this heartbreaking story reveals, even the most familiar places can turn into scenes of tragedy when faced with human malice. As this narrative comes to a close, I want to pose a question. How far can a person's desire for control and power over another go? Do you think this tragedy could have been prevented? Gloria, lost in her novels like many of us, sought solace and tranquility in the familiar. Yet sometimes what brings us comfort can become a trap. This case serves as a poignant reminder to stay aware of our surroundings and cherish those we love. No one knows when or under what circumstances another life may be cut short. Ryan Smith was born in 1975 in San Diego, California, USA. From a young age, he was an adventurous adventurer, passionate about traveling and getting to know different cultures around the world. This passion to discover the diversity of people through customs, languages, and tradition and prompted Ryan to immigrate from his country. At the age of 27, this young man sought to get acquainted with the life of the countries of Eurasia, especially those that belonged to the collapsed Soviet Union. So in 2022, Ryan went with his backpack and dreams in tow to remote Azerbaijan, one of the countries of the former Soviet Union. The country, surrounded by the Caspian Sea and the Caucasus Mountains, is located at what can be considered the crossroads of Eastern Europe and Western Asia. So, for a young traveler, it was an ideal starting point for the world he intended to discover. Ryan settled in Baku, the capital of Azerbaijan, where he studied the language and culture. On his web portal, he described how at that time he worked at a carpet market surrounded by a walled city, and this allowed him to get acquainted with one of the oldest and most valuable craft practices in the region. The methods of making carpets are passed down from generation to generation, and it can be said that this is a tradition that has almost disappeared over time. The young designer was impressed by the beauty of the products and thought about the business associated with the manufacture of handmade carpets. In December 2005, Ryan, mindful of his idea, returned to the United States to lay the foundations of the project. While on American soil, he met a young and attractive teacher, Laura Joy, with whom he got engaged, and then married her. Laura supported her husband's hobbies of travel and foreign culture, and in 2011, the couple visited the former Soviet Republic of Georgia, which borders Azerbaijan. In Georgia, in the city of Marneuli, young people got married, and both intended to establish the production of traditional carpets there. The couple had a son in 2014, whom their young parents named Caleb, and at the same time Ryan and Laura were promoting their long-awaited handmade carpet weaving project. The project, developed by an American using traditional Azerbaijani methods, everything made using this technology could be sold on the international market for more than $1,000. While Laura worked as an English teacher at a local public school, her husband toured the villages of the region in search of weavers willing to work with them. To his surprise, Ryan did not find many masters using traditional methods. Some of those who first joined the plan refused to cooperate for various reasons. Some did not agree with the prices that Ryan offered, while others were not familiar with the original designer and were not sure they could produce what the brand needed. Ryan said in his blog that he spent 4 days in Kosalari, and it was there that he found artisans interested in his project. Ryan's goal was not only to make a profit or to save the development of an ancient culture. He was also interested in becoming something of a public benefactor, attracting women in rural areas who know ancient weaving techniques to his project.
giving them the opportunity to revive the craft that would allow them to support their families. Soon, Ryan and Laura Smith became one of the most respected, and the visiting American considered a city with a population of no more than 20,000 people to be the most expensive place for himself. His wife, Laura, became close to the city, with its residents engaged in teaching, made many friends, while Ryan, promoting the value of the ancient carpet-weaving culture, earned respect. Most residents considered the Smith couple kind and honest people to whom they could turn for help. A couple of visiting Americans got so used to the local society, traditions, and culture that in 2012 they applied for citizenship and soon became citizens of the United States and Georgia. It was rumored that the couple planned to build a kindergarten with a playground on their own money. But it was at a time when the couple had already decided that they had finally found a home, realized that the future of their family was promising. A tragedy knocked on their doors, and all their plans collapsed in the most unexpected and nightmarish way. In July 2018, 43-year-old Ryan and 42-year-old Laura planned to take a couple of days off to enjoy a vacation next to little Caleb and get away from the routine. Sabina Talibuba, Laura's friend, said that Laura called her on Wednesday, July 4th, shared her plans to go to the mountains, and warned them that they would be gone for 2 days. The couple chose a small, picturesque place, hidden from the eyes, near the Gudori Mountains as their destination. This area is known for its trails, beautiful waterfalls, and stunning gorges, ideal for relaxing walks and picnics in nature. In this secluded corner, instead of being distracted and finding peace of mind, the Smith family experienced their worst nightmare. Ryan and Laura were looking for a local resident who would serve as their guide so that they could not get lost, and calmly, without fear, traveled in mountainous places. And the parents were also concerned about the safety of little Caleb. I would like the journey not to be exhausting and uncomfortable for the baby. So they met with a local shepherd, Malchus Kabauri, who, although he did not live in this area, but, despite the young age of 19, knew the neighborhood well, because he traveled around them daily and grazed herds of sheep and goats. Malchus was distinguished by a calm character. The locals considered him a good guy. Confident in the positive reviews about Malchus, who knew the area, the Smith family hired him as a guide. It had not been long since their departure to the mountains when the couple found out about Malchus's dark intentions and claims. As it became known later, the group went out on the mountain, and having reached the clearing, set up camp for dinner. They chose a place near one of the many springs in the area to have fresh water quenching their thirst in the summer heat. Obviously, at some point Ryan paid attention to his guide, because he felt that he was not careful enough with the gun, which he always carried with him. There was a heated discussion between the two men, and no one expected Malchus to point a gun at Ryan and shoot him in the head. Then he fired another shot at the man in the back. Laura's terrified screams and the baby's crying drowned out the echoes of gunfire, rumbling in the mountains, but the worst was yet to come. Despite the woman's pleas, Malchus put the muzzle of the gun to Caleb's head and fired at point-blank range. Frightened and unaware of what had just happened in front of her, Laura turned to stone, but when she saw Malchus's cold gaze, she understood his true intentions. Her instinct for self-preservation worked. Laura ran as fast as she could to avoid the fate of her husband and son. But when she reached the edge of the waterfall cliff, she realized that she had no way out, and there was no way for her to escape. The shepherd used a weapon to force the woman to violence, and then allegedly pushed her off a cliff. Laura's body fell on the bank of the waterfall. According to the subsequent investigation, Malchus took Caleb's body and buried it in a secluded place, sending the murder weapon there as well. Then the shepherd returned to the village as if nothing had happened. Laura's friend Sabine began to worry when, after 3 days, Laura did not return from a family trip. Sabine tried to call Ryan or Laura, but she never got an answer. Ryan's entourage was also confused, as it was very unusual for him to be away for so long without contacting anyone. On Friday, July 6th, the Center for Rapid Response and Emergency Situations received a message about the possible disappearance of a Georgian family of American origin in the mountains. The caller was Sabine, who said that the Smith family had been in the mountains for more than 2 days with their little son of 4 years old, and they could not be contacted by phone. A team of 15 rescuers was sent to the gorge to search, where presumably a family was missing. Upon arrival in the designated area, rescuers found Laura's belongings and car, but moving further along the route of the small group, the searchers found a terrible find. A lifeless body lay at the foot of the waterfall. Confused rescuers stepped up rescue efforts and expanded the search area. A human corpse was found about 800 meters from the waterfall. The humidity and heat inherent in the season accelerated the decomposition of the body, so the initial report of the authorities was that the victims showed no signs of violence. In accordance with the Criminal Code of Georgia, an investigation was launched, but nothing was known about the couple's child yet. It took another 3 days when the fate of the defenseless baby became clear. Investigators managed to find out that Malchus was the last person with whom the family communicated. A 19-year-old shepherd was detained and told during interrogation that he knew where Caleb was. 4 days after the Smith family went to the mountains, Malchus led investigators to the place where he buried Caleb, as well as the weapon. The next day, the Georgian police released a statement saying that a young shepherd, Malchus Kabauri, had been taken into custody, and he was accused of murdering the Smith family. The news of the murder of a married couple and their son shocked Georgia, especially Marneuli and the community of weavers. The American consulate also expressed its alarm over this crime. In fact, the FBI team participated in the investigation together with the Georgian authorities and cooperated in the search and processing of evidence. On July 11th, the Tbilisi Municipal Court decided to place Malchus, who pleaded not guilty to the charges, under arrest. The conductor claimed that the real killers of the family were 2 foreigners who arrived in a black car. Allegedly, these people killed the Smith family, threatened to kill him and his family if he reported to the police, and left Malchus alive so that suspicion of a triple murder fell on the shepherd. Violence against Laura was rejected by Malchus's lawyer, because according to the guy, he was not capable of such a thing, since he was a virgin. On July 12th, family, friends, and activists of public organizations gathered in front of Ryan's house in Marmilli with toys, flowers, and lit candles to express condolences and remember the victims. The next day, Malchus's lawyer confirmed the innocence of the accused. He continued to claim that the crime was committed by 2 foreigners, and that the psychological pressure exerted on his client forced Malchus to initially plead guilty. But evidence against Malchus began to appear one after another. The most convincing evidence of Malchus's guilt was the autopsy report of the victims. It was found that Ryan's body had 2 gunshot wounds, one in the head and one in the back. Caleb was shot in the head at point-blank range. In Laura's case, violence against her was proven, and DNA tests confirmed that the biological material found in her body and on her underwear belonged to Malchus. The DNA of Ryan and the defendant were also found on the murder weapon. In addition, a technical examination conducted by the FBI on the phones of the victims and their alleged killer showed that there were photos of Laura's lifeless body at the waterfall in the memory of Malchus's phone. The shepherd even showed them to several local acquaintances, to whom he said that he had accidentally stumbled upon a corpse while walking through these places. Experts found in the search history and the phone that a few days before this incident, Malchus had visited various sites of an intimate nature. All this led investigators to the conclusion that the motive of the crime was the young man's interest in Laura, and that his actions were deliberate from the very moment when the Smith family contacted Malchus to take them to the waterfall. After the release of the autopsy results, Malchus's lawyer, David, resigned, saying that for reasons of principle he could not defend the shepherd. David was replaced by another lawyer, who from that moment led the case. He insisted on the client's innocence and filed a motion to withdraw Malchus's previous confession. The shepherd's mother, Mariana, supported her son and agreed with the lawyer that the police may have forced the guy to confess to the crime under threat of imprisonment. Relatives of the suspect claimed that because of a high-profile crime, the authorities accused Malchus in order to close the case. However, on November 9, 2018, Malchus was charged with the murder of 3 members of the Smith family. He was also charged with additional charges of violence against Laura. The psychological examination conducted on the young shepherd showed that he is sane, healthy, and ready for trial. The term of pre-trial detention expired on April 9, 2019, but the prosecutor said that Bay had strong evidence of Malchus's guilt and that he would be punished for such a terrible crime. A meeting of 12 members of the court on March 25, 2019, unanimously ruled that Malchus was guilty of premeditated murder with extreme cruelty of more than 2 people. He committed premeditated murder in order to conceal another crime, namely intimate assault. On March 27, 2019, the judge of the Gori district announced the decision to sentence to life imprisonment. While the relatives of the criminal protested against the life sentence, which they considered unfair, the sentence became a relief for friends and relatives of the Smith family, and defense lawyers announced that they would appeal the verdict to the appellate instances in connection with alleged procedural violations. The U.S. consul in Georgia said that the verdict provided justice for the Smith family, adding that the evidence left no doubt about Malchus's guilt. Since the arrival of Ryan and Laura Smith in Georgia, these people have won the love and respect of the residents of Marneuli, and their brutal murder has dealt a blow to the community that the couple chose as their home. The community project developed by Ryan not only revived an ancient tradition, but also provided many women with a source of income and stability. The death of the spouses plunged into sadness and uncertainty dozens of women who aspired to a successful business. Shortly after the terrible events that claimed the lives of the founders, the project was revived by foreign investors who support Ryan's ideas and offer opportunities for local craftsmen. Ryan and Laura left behind the world they knew in the West, hoping to discover cultural treasures, and while they were greeted by grateful members of the community, their fate crossed with a sinister creature who hid his essence behind the guise of a kind shepherd. On the morning of August 22, 2016, residents of the small Spanish town of Pobra do Caraminal, rushing to work, found flyers posted everywhere. Volunteers had tirelessly pasted them on every building. The pictures on the flyers showed a young 18-year-old Diana Maria Kerr Lopez Pinel. The young girl was of a very frail build at about 6 feet tall. Her black hair, brown eyes, and delicate appearance made her irresistible. The evening before she disappeared, she was wearing pink shorts, a t-shirt, a white sweatshirt, and black sneakers. The description said the girl left home the night before and suddenly disappeared. Since last night, her family, along with volunteers and special services, have been desperately and tirelessly searching for the missing girl in every possible way. They have scoured every street and explored every corner, hoping to find some trace and bring Diana home. Juan Carlos, Diana's father, was in Madrid, but wasted no time in contacting the police to trace the calls from his daughter's phone and find out the last location of her phone. He also contacted the local newspaper and urged residents to help with the search. If you have any information, even the smallest, contact the police. The police need your help, Diana's father reported. Diana's mother, on the verge of depression, pleaded with the public. "We are doing everything we can to find Diana, but we still haven't gotten any answers. If you have any information, please help us. We are in a situation where even the slightest rumor can become important and help us find our daughter." Diana Maria Kerr Lopez Pinel was born on August 12, 1998, in Madrid. She was the daughter of Diana Cristina Lopez Pinel Pinarejo and Juan Carlo Kerr, and had a sister named Valeria. The family was quite wealthy and closely related. However, in 2013, Diana's parents divorced, which greatly affected the sisters. They faced depression, often conflicted over the attention of their mother, who took most of the care of them. Despite this, the father saw his daughters regularly. During vacations, Diana and her mother and sister often visited the small town of Pobra do Caraminal on the coast, with a population of about 10,000. In the summer of 2016, Diana's family spent their vacations as usual in the cozy town of Apobra do Caraminhal. Every summer, they returned here to enjoy the silence and beauty of the place. Sunday, August 21st, promised to be just like all the other days. In the evening, around 10 o'clock, Diana went up to her mother and told her that she was going to go to Vala Inclin Park to meet her friends and have fun in honor of the Feast of the Virgin Carmen. Vala Inclin Park was not far from the cottage where the family was staying, and was a place where Diana often walked. Her mother, seeing nothing strange in it, allowed her to go there again. The girl spent that evening merrily among her friends. 4 hours later, Diana said goodbye to her friends, and was about to return home, not realizing that this would be their last goodbye. On the way, she met her acquaintance Paseo de Ariel, not far from the very pizzeria where Diana often spent time. It was about 2:30 in the morning when they said goodbye. Paseo de Ariel was the last person to see Diana on that dark night. The morning of August 22nd, 2016 turned into a nightmare for Diana's mother, Maria Care Lopez Pinel. At 8:30 in the morning, she realized that something was wrong with her daughter. The girl hadn't come home from a party. Her cell phone was off or out of range, and this caused alarm. The mother decided not to wait and immediately called the police, reporting her daughter missing. Based on the information from the mother, it could be concluded that Diane did not have any serious emotional or mental health issues, despite a troubled childhood due to her parents' divorce.
Her prolonged absence was very strange and raised serious concerns. Police began to unravel the tangle of incomprehensible events surrounding the disappearance of Diana Maria Care Lopez Pinel, and investigators had to find out what happened when Diana disappeared without a trace. It turned out that Diana's last messages were sent to a friend of hers from Madrid via WhatsApp. In them, she wrote about a certain stranger who was stalking her and shouting strange phrases, scaring the girl. These messages were Diana's last contact with the outside world, as she no longer responded to the messages, although they were read. The next day, the police began to retrace the route Diana had to take to get home. It was there, along the road, that they found a black hairband that looked very much like the one Diana had been wearing that night. It was the only thing that was found at the scene of the disappearance. But other than that, investigators had no other evidence. Diana's friends were unable to provide any useful information, and there were no CCTV cameras on the last stretch of Diana's journey. The street was poorly lit and sparsely populated, with only a few garages and a dilapidated Boomerang nightclub along the road. Some witnesses claimed to have seen Diana get out of a car with 3 guys in it. Allegedly, she moved to another car, which took her away from the port, but these testimonies were not confirmed. Investigators considered 2 main versions of what happened. The first one suggested that Diana was kidnapped by someone she might have known. The second version linked the disappearance to a possible attack by a maniac. Diana's mother even suggested a third version, that her daughter could have been taken away on a boat. Diana's friend and ex-boyfriend reported that she met a guy from Morocco, and together they bought hashish. But this information only complicated the picture of the disappearance. An important point was the information in the media about the discovery of the clothes that Diana wore that evening. However, Diana's mother denied this information, claiming that no clothes were found. In addition, her credit card and identification were left in the house. Diana could not just run away, leaving all her belongings and documents behind. This fact and other circumstances confirmed that the girl's disappearance was not of her own free will. Nevertheless, the case still remained mysterious and could not be solved. Shortly after Diana's disappearance, the press reported on the quarrel that broke out between Diana and her mother just a few days before the tragic event. The media claimed that Diana had suffered a nervous breakdown that required medical attention, and that her younger sister, Valeria, had also been hospitalized with the same symptoms. To prevent further litigation and conflict, custody rights to the younger sister were transferred to the father on Thursday, September 1st. This was a preventative measure to avert further strife in the local community, which was already gripped by an unsettling atmosphere over Diana's disappearance. The father and his daughter left town, and rumors began to spread that the family was hiding something important. According to Diana's friends, running away from home was commonplace for the sisters, especially for her younger sister, Valeria, who was only 16 years old. Relationships in the family were complicated, and quarrels between mother and daughters were not uncommon. This information became available to the public, and the question immediately arose, why was the mother so anxious when Diana did not return home, if the girl had previously often left home? On Wednesday, August 31st, Diana's parents did not show up for a scheduled press interview where they were scheduled to give details of the investigation. The family lawyer explained that the parents were emotionally crushed at the thought that they might never see their daughter again. The newspaper El Mundo published an article on September 11 that shed light on other aspects of the family's life. It said that the mother's words that Diana did not have mental problems were contradicted by information about her April disappearance. At the time, Diane left home for 3 days and her mother did not contact police. The girl would turn off her phone to anger her mother and said she no longer wanted to live with her. Letters written by Diana and Valeria to each other also appeared in the press. From them, it became clear that both sisters were going through serious emotional problems. Valeria has even been hospitalized several times over the past year, once having to have her stomach pumped due to an overdose of prescription drugs. In the absence of progress in the investigation into Diana's disappearance, prosecutors have launched an investigation into the abuse of the Lopez Pinel family's youngest daughter, Valeria. The investigation into Diana Care's disappearance continued to be intense and progressed at full speed. Forensic experts seized a number of items belonging to the girl, including a toothbrush, a comb, a personal computer, her diary, and some prescription drugs. These items were subjected to a thorough analysis. Investigators then began questioning Diana's acquaintances, including a young Moroccan man with whom Diana had a brief affair. All of these measures failed to yield the desired results, and further police searches remained unsuccessful. The police conducted extensive searches in the mountains, forests, rivers, and lakes near the site of the disappearance. However, it appears that Diana disappeared around 3 a.m., and the last signal from her phone was found in the Tarragona area, 13 miles from where the family was staying. 72 days after her disappearance, Diana Care's case remained a mystery. None of the investigators' leads have yet been confirmed. In addition to a hairband, police found a cell phone that matched the description of Diana's phone. Her father confirmed that it was his daughter's cell phone. 2 months after her disappearance, Diana's Facebook profile was suddenly activated. Friends and relatives immediately notified the police and provided screenshots. It turned out that the Remind Password function had been used to avoid entering profile login details. This left 2 theories. Either Diana had forgotten her password, or the attacker was trying to gain access to her profile. Diana's phone was a key element in the case, however, it was never able to shed any light on the mysterious disappearance. On November 10, 2016, the driver of the very car in which Diana was allegedly last seen was finally identified. The man had previously been detained on charges of human trafficking. Information about his involvement in Diana's disappearance was kept secret for a long time so as not to disrupt the investigation. His wife claimed that he was with her that night, which excluded him from the list of suspects. However, on December 25, 2017, an incident occurred that became a key point in the investigation. One of the girls was attacked by a man, demanding her phone and threatening her with a weapon. The terrified victim screamed, and a couple passing by came to her aid. They rescued the girl from the thug who tried to pull her into a car. The shaken victim immediately contacted police, providing a description of the perpetrator and his license plate number. The next morning, police arrested 41-year-old Jose Enrique Abingay, who was also known as El Chico. The man already had a criminal past. The police immediately found out Jose Enrique turned out to be the same driver detained in 2016 on suspicion of kidnapping Diana Care. However, he was then released because they believed the alibi provided by his wife. The police again questioned the suspect and his wife. As a result of the interrogation, the wife admitted that she had previously lied, and in fact, on the night of Diana's disappearance, her husband was out of the house and did not return until 4 a.m.
Jose Enrique was eventually forced to admit that he accidentally hit Diana on the road and then was afraid to go to the police. That is why he decided to dispose of the body. However, he later changed his version of events, confessing to kidnapping and killing Diana. According to him, he came to the seashore to pick up gasoline from abandoned cars, and it was there that he saw Diana. Jose kidnapped her, tried to force her to have sexual intercourse, and then strangled her. This shocking truth brought new details to the case and confirmed that Diana Kear's disappearance was the result of a gruesome crime. The disappearance of Diana Care Lopez Pinel was a long and harrowing experience for her family and everyone who followed the case. Nearly 500 days of investigation and constant media speculation only added to the pain of her loved ones. The accusations directed at Diana's parents only served to confuse and hinder the investigation. Despite this, through persistent investigation and the testimony of a second victim, investigators were able to gather the necessary evidence and find the perpetrator. Diana will be remembered by her loved ones as a bright and vivacious young woman who was unlucky enough to find herself in the path of a violent criminal. Her story serves as a reminder of how important it is to unite in the difficult moments of fighting crime to end impunity and ensure the safety of all citizens. Unfortunately, the perpetrator did not admit for a long time where he hid Diana's body, but later, family and friends managed to say goodbye to Diana and give her a proper burial. The body was found in the well of an abandoned warehouse. In January 2018, Jose was sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole after serving 35 years.
Fatal love from the past. Kindness has the power not only to save the world, but also to destroy the one who brings it to others. The natural desire to help everyone, to protect, to guard, to save, and to prevent harm often leads to tragedy. It is important to recognize which people should not be helped, and even more so, to avoid covering for them in the hope that they will realize their mistake and change. The story of Cecilia Hadad is a vivid example of how believing in the best and the desire to protect someone once dear can first poison and then take a life. She feared harming her former lover in any way, but he had no fear in dealing with her and fleeing to the other side of the world, hoping justice wouldn't reach him there. An unidentified body in the river. On an early spring morning, Sunday, April 29, 2018, a man fishing on Lane Cove River, a northern tributary of the Parramatta River in Sydney, Australia, came upon a horrific scene. Floating downstream, face down, was something resembling a human body. The elderly fisherman couldn't believe his eyes at first and even thought it was a mistake, but within minutes, all doubts vanished. It was the body of a young woman with long dark hair. The man immediately reported the incident to the police, and soon, a few dozen feet downstream, the lifeless body of a young woman showing signs of violent death was pulled from the river. She had no identification or mobile phone on her, so investigators were tasked with identifying the deceased and determining the circumstances of the tragedy. The version that the incident was an accident was dismissed during the initial examination of the remains. The body was still fresh, having spent less than a day in the water. Clear strangulation marks were visible on her neck, and there were defensive wounds on her hands, indicating that the victim had fought desperately when she was attacked. The victim was dressed in a t-shirt and wide pants with many large pockets, which were stuffed with stones. It was obvious that the criminal had hoped the body, weighed down by the extra load, would sink and not be discovered anytime soon. However, some of the stones likely fell out since the pockets had no fasteners, allowing the body to simply float downstream. A toxicology report revealed no traces of alcohol, prohibited substances, or strong drugs in the victim's system. There were also no signs of intimate violence on the body. As initially suspected, the cause of death was mechanical asphyxiation. She had been strangled with bare hands. The victim appeared to be around 35 to 40 years old, so the police immediately checked reports of missing women within this age range. By the afternoon, they had identified the deceased after relatives reported the disappearance of 38-year-old Cecilia Hadad, who had suddenly stopped responding on April 28th and missed an important work meeting. A glance at Cecilia's photo convinced detectives that it was her body that had been pulled from the river, and relatives arriving for identification confirmed the fact. But who could have so cruelly dealt with a young woman and successful entrepreneur known for her active charity work? However, the name of the main suspect was almost immediately identified, but by that time, he was already on another continent. Who was Cecilia Hadad? Cecilia Bruna Hadad was born in the fall of 1979 in the bustling metropolis of Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. She grew up in a close-knit, middle-class family where her parents did everything they could to provide their many children with a good education and all the necessities. From a young age, Cecilia was very smart, responsible, and goal-oriented. She became one of the best students in her school and dreamed of continuing her education at one of the most prestigious universities in the country. Additionally, Cecilia had a kind heart. She couldn't ignore someone else's misfortune and always tried to help within her abilities. Those around her described her as a compassionate, caring, and generous young woman, always ready to lend a hand. After finishing school, Hadad became a student at the Pontifical Catholic University of Rio de Janeiro, one of Brazil's leading private universities. There, she earned both her bachelor's and master's degrees in engineering. After receiving her diploma, Cecilia successfully passed an interview at a major mining company, where she was eagerly hired. Almost immediately, her career took off, and within a year, she became a leading specialist. In 2007, at the age of 27, the Brazilian woman decided to dramatically change her life and moved to Australia after receiving an enticing job offer. Cecilia fully understood the challenges she would face being in a foreign country, far from her loved ones and friends, but she decided to take the risk. Cecilia was fluent in Spanish and Portuguese, her native languages, but had to learn English almost from scratch, a task she handled successfully and quickly. Hadad took a managerial position at one of Australia's largest mining companies and quickly fit in with the team. The sweet, sociable, and friendly woman made many friends and began actively engaging in charity work and volunteering, helping people and homeless animals. Alongside this, she developed a new hobby, hiking and skiing in the mountains. In 2016, Cecilia founded her own consulting company, which supported and guided people looking to start their own businesses. Her clients included both native Australians and immigrants who had come to the country in search of a better life, just as she had once done. Personal life. Working at the aforementioned major Australian industrial company, Cecilia earned a good salary and could afford whatever she wanted. When she started her own business, she was able to bring her younger brother and sister from Brazil, helping them find jobs and supporting them financially at first. Overall, things were going well for Cecilia. She traveled, earned a second higher education, and lived life to the fullest. However, in terms of her personal life, Hadad was far less fortunate. Back in her student days, in her hometown of Rio de Janeiro, she entered into a romantic relationship with Mario Marcelo Santoro, a man 7 years her senior and her complete opposite. The young man was lazy, unambitious, and didn't aspire to much. But Cecilia loved him, always trying to help and motivate him toward success. In the end, when Cecilia received a job offer from Australia, Mario refused to go with her, fearing the challenges they would face in a new country. However, the young woman wasn't about to give up on her dream, one she had worked so hard for, and after prolonged but fruitless persuasion, she left alone. In the mid-2000s, while working in Sydney, Cecilia began an office romance with one of her colleagues. This relationship led to marriage, but the union was short-lived, lasting less than 3 years. The couple didn't have children, and they parted ways amicably, without hard feelings or resentment. They even maintained a friendly relationship afterward. A blast from the past. In 2016, shortly after her divorce, Cecilia decided to fly home to visit her parents and old friends. By that time, she had already left her job and was successfully growing her own business. She looked fantastic, enthusiastically talked about her life in Australia, and eagerly made plans for the future. On the third day of her stay, Hadad unexpectedly ran into Mario, whom she hadn't seen in 9 years since she emigrated to Australia. The man was shocked by the success his former girlfriend had achieved, while he himself was barely making ends meet. This chance encounter turned out to be fateful for Cecilia, who suddenly realized that she still had tender feelings for her ex-boyfriend. For the next few days, the two spent time walking around their favorite places where they had once been happy. After Cecilia returned to Sydney, they continued to talk and text every day. Within a month, Cecilia bought Mario a plane ticket and essentially brought him to live with her, deciding he was the man she would be happy with for the rest of her life. The couple settled in Cecilia's spacious apartment in an elite residential complex, and for a time, she fully supported her beloved. Later, using her connections, she helped him secure a good position with a high salary and actively encouraged his career growth. Hadad was once again in love, just like in her youth, and failed to notice that her partner was simply taking advantage of the situation. Toxic relationship. Shortly after the couple moved in together, their relationship began to deteriorate. The man became jealous, domineering, and tried to control every aspect of Cecilia's life. However, independent and strong-willed, Cecilia refused to be manipulated. On top of that, Mario started meddling in her business, wanting a share since he didn't like working for someone else. The couple frequently argued, but Hadad always tried to resolve conflicts, seeking compromises and making every effort to save the relationship. Yet, her partner was simply draining her emotionally, monitoring her actions, taking her phone and work laptop without permission, and trying to limit her social circle. Cecilia endured this situation for almost a year, but finally decided to have an honest conversation and informed Mario of her intention to break up. This news infuriated him. He started yelling and insulting Cecilia, and when she tried to calm him down, he struck her across the face. He had been physically aggressive before, pushing her or grabbing her arms hard enough to leave bruises, but this was the first time he had hit her. This was the last straw, and Hadad simply showed him the door. At first, Santoro tried to beg for her forgiveness. He sent her touching messages, apologized, and sent flowers and gifts, but Cecilia remained firm. Realizing he couldn't fix things, the man changed tactics, resorting to threats and intimidation. From that point on, he began stalking his ex-girlfriend, turning her life into a nightmare. Obsessed stalker. After the breakup, Mario rented an apartment in a complex just 10 minutes away from Cecilia's home. He called her daily, sent dozens of messages, and constantly tried to meet her, waiting at her front door. Cecilia still tried to reason with him, hoping to resolve the conflict peacefully, and believed that her ex would calm down. In January 2018, late in the evening, Santoro showed up at Hadad's apartment again. At first, she didn't want to let him in, but he was persistent and forced his way inside. He attacked the petite woman, but she miraculously managed to escape and barricade herself in another room. While the stalker tried to break down the door, she pleaded with him to stop, think, and leave. Eventually, Cecilia threatened to call the police, and only then did Mario calm down and leave her home. Cecilia didn't report the incident to law enforcement, nor did she mention that Mario had been stalking her for months and threatening her. She knew that his visa had expired, and that if he came to the authorities' attention, he would be deported back to Brazil immediately. Cecilia pitied the man she once loved, knowing that back home he would return to his worthless life. Despite this, Hadad understood that staying in her apartment was no longer safe, so she temporarily moved in with her sister Carol and then spent about a month living with a close friend named Rita. Both women urged Cecilia to file a police report, sensing that this situation could end in tragedy, but she was still afraid of harming her tormentor. She hoped that he would realize the error of his ways, calm down, and leave her alone. Most importantly, she didn't believe that her ex-boyfriend was capable of causing her any serious physical harm. When Cecilia returned to her apartment in early April 2018, she realized that Mario had been there several times in her absence. She was horrified to discover that he had a spare set of keys, which he had initially returned after the breakup, but took back when he forced his way in during the night. Neighbors also confirmed that they had seen Santoro near the complex multiple times, and even going up to the floor where Hadad's apartment was located. When they reasonably suggested she go to the police, Cecilia again refused, assuring them she would handle the situation herself. She planned to change the locks, but decided to live incognito for the time being, not drawing attention to herself, to see if her stalker would leave her alone. For over 2 weeks, Cecilia acted as though she wasn't home. She didn't turn on the lights, tried to stay quiet, and only came and went when she was sure Mario wasn't around. At the slightest suspicion, she would spend the night at her sister's or a friend's. The stress almost caused her to have a breakdown, but then, suddenly, everything changed in an instant. Strange goodbye. On April 25th, 2018, Mario unexpectedly called Cecilia and, in a calm voice, said that he had realized everything and would no longer bother her. He also apologized and informed her that he had bought tickets for a flight to Rio de Janeiro. He planned to leave early in the morning on April 28th and asked if she would meet him one last time to say goodbye. Hadad agreed, but said she would meet him directly at the airport, where they could see each other and talk. After this call, it was as if a weight had been lifted from her shoulders. Her stalker and tormentor had decided to leave on his own, and she believed he would no longer disturb her. Overjoyed, she called her sister and told her everything. But Carol was not as thrilled and suspected something was off. She begged Cecilia not to meet with Mario, but Cecilia dismissed her concerns, assuring her that everything would be fine and that nothing could happen to her at the airport. Cecilia was excited at the thought that her nightmare was finally ending and that she could start a new life. Sadly, that miracle did not happen. Mysterious disappearance. On Saturday, April 28th, Cecilia was supposed to arrive at Sydney International Airport by 7 a.m. to see her ex-boyfriend off and say a final goodbye. Afterward, she had an important work meeting scheduled and another in the afternoon. The night before, Cecilia had one last call with her sister, telling her about her plans. Carol again tried to dissuade her from meeting her ex, but Cecilia was adamant. She insisted that she needed to see for herself that Mario boarded the plane and would no longer bother her. The two sisters talked for about an hour, and Cecilia promised to call as soon as he left. However, the next day, instead of a call, a rather strange message arrived from Hadad. She said she was heading to the mountains for a couple of days because she needed to reflect on everything that had happened and clear her head. Carol tried to call her, but the phone was already turned off. Soon, it became clear that similar messages had been sent to several of Cecilia's friends and colleagues, and she had not shown up for any of her scheduled meetings, which was completely out of character for her. That evening, Cecilia's family and friends reported her missing to the police, providing the name and details of the potential suspect. At that time, they still hoped she was alive, but by the next morning, all hope was shattered when her sister was called to identify her body. Investigation and evidence search. On April 29th, the police combed the riverbank upstream, searching for clues or evidence. They found a discarded pair of men's shoes soaked through in the grass. Detectives speculated that the criminal didn't want to leave tracks and decided to dispose of the shoes. In the victim's apartment, dried footprints left by wet socks were found. But why did he return to the victim's apartment after dealing with her? Since Mario didn't own a car, he used the vehicle of the woman he had deprived of life to dispose of her body. Sand, fragments of coastal vegetation, and puddles of river water were found inside the car. Additionally, numerous fingerprints belonging to the suspect were discovered. Moreover, almost all of Santoro's movements were tracked through his cell phone signal, and he was caught on several street surveillance cameras. It was determined that Mario took a taxi to the airport. Authorities quickly located the driver, who agreed to speak with them. The driver claimed the passenger was calm, but asked for a significant detour to pass over a small bridge crossing a river away from the bustling city roads. There, he asked to stop, got out, and threw a bag into the water, as well as something resembling a set of keys. He then returned to the car and they continued the journey. The driver took the police to that very bridge. Divers were called to the scene and spent hours searching the riverbed for evidence. Fortunately, the current in that spot was weak, so they soon found the mysterious bag, followed by the set of keys. Inside the bag were the victim's cell phone, work laptop, some documents, a wallet, and personal items. It was clear the suspect was trying to create the illusion that the woman had left town, so people would believe she had indeed gone to the mountains. He also disposed of all duplicate keys to make it harder to access the apartment. By the time Cecilia's body was pulled from the river, the perpetrator had already landed in Rio de Janeiro, convinced that he would never be caught and would escape punishment. Retrieving a criminal on another continent is indeed a challenge, but with no doubt left about his involvement in the crime, Interpol was called in. The manhunt expanded internationally, drawing significant media attention. Search and arrest of the suspect. Only after Australian police gathered and presented irrefutable evidence linking the Brazilian citizen to the brutal crime was Mario officially declared wanted in his home country. He was finally apprehended on July 7, 2018, at a friend's apartment, where he had been staying the entire time. Santoro didn't resist arrest, but immediately requested a lawyer. During the initial interrogations, he denied his guilt, but soon, under the weight of overwhelming evidence, he began confessing. However, even as he admitted to the crime, he desperately tried to blame the victim. Mario claimed that it wasn't him, but his former girlfriend, who had been stalking him after their breakup and wouldn't let him live in peace. He said he decided to leave the country just to escape her, but Cecilia allegedly stole his passport to prevent him from leaving. That morning, according to him, he went to her apartment to retrieve his document without which he couldn't board the plane, but she refused to return it. A struggle ensued, and he accidentally ended her life. The accused claimed he tried to resuscitate Hadad, performing CPR and chest compressions. However, when he realized she was gone, he panicked and attempted to cover his tracks by disposing of her body and the evidence. His best idea, he said, was to dump everything in the river. Reconstructing the timeline of events. Reconstructing the timeline of that tragic day was a painstaking process since Mario constantly changed his testimony and tried to confuse the investigation to minimize his guilt. He played on sympathy, even attempting to cry.
but no one believed his version of events. The victim's family, friends, and colleagues all testified against Santoro as they had witnessed how he had made Cecilia's life a nightmare. According to the investigation, by the time Mario purchased his plane tickets, he had already decided to take the life of his former girlfriend and was meticulously planning the details. On Saturday, April 28th, around 5:30 a.m., he arrived at Cecilia's building and rang the intercom. Cecilia wasn't expecting him and thought they would meet at the airport. Feeling uneasy, she didn't want to let him in. A few minutes later, the man opened the door using a spare key he had and climbed the stairs to Cecilia's apartment. It's likely she let him in because otherwise the neighbors would have heard some noise, but they reported hearing nothing unusual. Mario immediately attacked Cecilia, strangling her and not giving her a chance to scream or call for help. She fought back desperately, as evidenced by the bruises and hematomas on her arms, but she was overpowered. After ending her life, he wrapped the body in a blanket, took the keys to her car, and quietly made his way to the parking lot while all the residents were still asleep. He drove to a secluded spot by the river, filled her pants pockets with rocks, and submerged her body in the water, hoping it wouldn't be discovered anytime soon. During this process, the suspect soaked his shoes and decided to discard them to avoid leaving any traces, as he planned to return to her apartment. Around 7 a.m., Mario returned to Cecilia's building using her car. He went back up to her apartment and quickly gathered some of her belongings, including documents and her laptop, to simulate her departure. He also sent text messages from her phone to family members and several friends, pretending she had suddenly gone on a trip to the mountains. He later put the phone in the same bag, which he threw from the bridge into the river. After completing this, Mario walked back to his own apartment where his suitcase was already packed. He showered, changed his clothes, and soaked the ones he had been wearing in bleach to destroy any potential evidence, then called a taxi to the airport. On the way, he asked the driver to make a detour to dispose of Cecilia's belongings, and within an hour, he calmly boarded a plane, convinced he would never be held accountable for his actions. The trial and verdict. Since the accused was a Brazilian citizen, he could not be extradited to another continent to stand trial for the crime he committed. However, the countries managed to reach an agreement and resolve legal differences to ensure the trial would be as fair as possible, although the suspect would serve his sentence in his home country. The bureaucratic hurdles and investigation process took some time, and the trial didn't begin until June 2023. Delegates from Australia, who had been directly involved in the investigation, traveled to Rio de Janeiro to participate in the trial. Throughout the proceedings, the defendant tried to evoke pity from the judges, crying and claiming to feel remorse, insisting he didn't understand how things had gone so wrong. On July 1st, 2023, Mario Santoro was found guilty of premeditated crime, as well as tampering with evidence and attempting to mislead the investigation. He was sentenced to 27 years in prison without the possibility of parole. The convicted man and his lawyers repeatedly tried to appeal the sentence, but the court upheld its decision. In March 2020, the COVID-19 pandemic hit the United States. The entire world began to shut down, and people were gripped with shock and fear of an unknown disease. On March 23rd, 12-year-old daughter Gretchen Anthony, who was visiting her father at the time, received a text message from her mother. "Good morning. I have tested positive for the coronavirus. That means I will have to stay home for at least 2 weeks." "Okay, I really hope you feel better," Ava replied. Shortly thereafter, the mom stopped sharing the location of her phone with her daughter. Over the next 3 days, friends and family members received several text messages describing Gretchen's deteriorating condition. What was strange was that no one could reach the 51-year-old woman. She didn't even call her beloved young daughter, which was very unlike a loving mom. Those close to her began to suspect a scenario far worse than even an acute case of COVID-19. Someone else was sending messages from Gretchen's phone to cover up her disappearance. The The police got involved, and soon it became clear to investigators looking for Gretchen that someone was indeed using the pandemic to cover up the woman's disappearance. Gretchen was born on January 8, 1969, in Doylestown, Pennsylvania. She spent most of her life up north, attending fashion school in New York City before moving to New Jersey, where she eventually became a teacher. In 2006, the blue-eyed blonde moved to Jupiter, the northernmost city in Palm Beach County, Florida. After working in the county's private schools for 8 years, Gretchen decided to try something new and took a job in the Human Resources Department of Viking Utility, an electrical contractor. The position allowed her to interact with new people, which Gretchen enjoyed. She considered the workforce her second family. Her first marriage didn't work out, but the former spouses remained on good terms and continued to raise their beloved daughter with shared custody. Gretchen led an active lifestyle and spent a lot of time in sports. It was through sports that she met David Anthony. Charismatic, able to charm, David, who was 7 years younger than Gretchen, first became her personal trainer and then her second husband. Women from all over the county came to see the young, muscular trainer. David was a star in the gym and was very popular, attracting many new students. Gretchen fell in love. The romance developed rapidly. After a brief engagement, the couple got married at the Eldest Chapel in Las Vegas. So in 2015, Gretchen Stoughton Crane became Gretchen Stoughton Anthony and found, in her opinion, the husband of her dreams. Gretchen's daughter adored her stepfather and even called him Bonus Dad. In total, the couple lived in marriage for 5 years. However, the relationship that began with magic and perfect happiness gradually turned into a woman's fear for her safety. When tragedy struck, police and later journalists began to inquire about the identity of the second spouse. They were in for a lot of surprises. As it turned out, David Ethan Anthony was originally known as David Anthony Deutsch, and then later changed his name. David Anthony Deutsch, a star college basketball player, was arrested in 1997 for robbing a Blockbuster video store with a water pistol and assaulting a police officer. In each case, he took a plea bargain and spent some time in jail. Growing up without a father in Palm Beach Gardens, David spent much of his childhood and adolescence alone. He didn't talk much, was withdrawn, had low self-esteem, and was bullied at school for being overweight. He wasn't even allowed to join a recreational sports league because he was so much larger than all the other kids. Not surprisingly, as a teenager, David struggled with severe depression and developed symptoms that his family believed were consistent with bipolar disorder. However, he refused to take any medication, devoted himself fanatically to sports, and really excelled at it. After high school, David received a scholarship to play college basketball and became a star on the team. He idolized basketball greats and even named his husky Kobe after his favorite basketball player, Kobe Bryant. On January 26, 2020, the idol will die in a helicopter crash, and this event will be another reason for David's unstable behavior. In the meantime, the smart, attractive coach ignores mental problems, bathes in deserved popularity, and becomes the husband of Gretchen. The couple lead an active lifestyle. David enjoys bicycling, deep-sea fishing, and kayaking. Gretchen works out hard at the gym, goes to the beach, kayaks, and does yoga. Unfortunately, only the first 2 years of marriage will prove to be happy. The remaining 3 years, the smiling blonde will spend trying to leave. Gretchen admitted to friends that her husband's behavior was becoming more and more manic, and at times he insulted her. They once even broke up for at least 6 months but got back together. Tabitha Hopkins, David's former boss at the gym, later recalled noticing strange mood swings in David. In 2017, things got so bad that Tabitha was forced to fire him for his aggressive behavior, especially towards women. David was indeed behaving very strangely and was unwilling to seek help. The man became obsessed with the end of the world and loaded 3 large bags of rice, several pots, pans, and 10 pairs of shoes into his truck in 2018. His family believed this episode was a symptom of bipolar and manic-depressive disorder. Bad periods were followed by good ones in which David tried to do something about his behavior. He even managed to get Tabitha Hopkins to give him his job back by assuring the gym owner that he was trying to be a better person and attending self-improvement seminars. Tabitha softened. There was no denying David's effectiveness as a trainer. The clients were delighted with him.
Over time, as the mental illness continued untreated, David's condition worsened. Gretchen recognized that her husband had problems and shared this with friends. Sometimes, she said, she would lock herself in their bedroom just to increase the distance between them. "I noticed this crazy look in his eyes," she texted a friend, Dawn, one morning in late December. David was gaining momentum, and the spouse didn't know what he was capable of. "I'm watching him on the cameras and waiting for him to go to bed," Gretchen wrote another evening. "Then I'll go downstairs, get a knife, and put it under my pillow, just in case, and hopefully sleep." That same year, on Christmas Eve, Gretchen couldn't find her personal belongings. She searched the house, looked in David's backpack, and found her wedding ring, passport, driver's license, credit cards, and some money. The incident so disturbed Gretchen that she texted Don, her boss and friend, that she was afraid of her own husband. By the end of the month, Gretchen made the decision to end the tumultuous relationship. In December 2019, she forced David to move out of the townhouse to her mother's house, who lived nearby, and changed the locks. It was during this time that David's colleagues noticed a gradual change in his behavior. Most of the time, the trainer was one of the first to arrive at the gym, but after the events in the family, he began to come later and later, seemed more and more withdrawn and sullen. On January 26th, Kobe Bryant, David's idol, dies. When Kobe Bryant passed away, something happened, Tabitha recalls. "You'd think David and Kobe Bryant were best friends. He was traumatized by it." In the days that followed, David was hysterical, crying and wailing in front of the fitness club groups he led and refusing to go home. Despite his emotionally fragile state, David took an active role in a controversial self-improvement program called Gratitude Training, which critics likened to a cult. He spent thousands of dollars on seminars, but refused to tell his family what he was doing during the sessions. David's behavior regressed. On February 24th, he failed to show up for work. When Tabitha tried to find out if he was okay, he attacked her, and the supervisor made the decision to terminate the employee permanently. This time, Tabitha caught a glimpse of David's frightening rage and was truly frightened. Hopkins texted Gretchen about the incident and asked her to be careful. "That's the last time I talked to Gretchen," she would later say. 4 days later, on February 28th, 2020, just weeks before her disappearance, Gretchen files for divorce. David's stability is rapidly going downhill, and he is becoming increasingly hostile. On March 7th, the woman David had begun dating booked a seat at an unusual art class. They were to drink wine and draw pictures under the guidance of the instructor. However, the evening did not go according to plan. When David wished to hug his companion during the class and she rejected the attempt, he jumped up, yelled at her in the middle of the class, and ran outside. David's behavior frightened the young woman, and she decided not to continue the interaction, telling him that he could not stay with her tonight. When they got to the house where David had left his truck, it became clear that David had different ideas about the matter. David, whom she'd only known for a month, had decided to move in with her. Duffel bags filled with men's clothes were spread out on her bed and dining room table, and food from his mother's house was stashed in the freezer. Kobe, David's husky, was running around in the backyard. David left only after a new friend called her neighborhood security company. When Gretchen went missing, her family told investigators that David was returning to her home after he left. The young woman was concerned for her safety and installed surveillance cameras throughout the house and garage. On March 11th, the World Health Organization declared a pandemic. A few days later, David, believing the pandemic to be an end-of-the-world prophecy, showed up at Gretchen's house in the early morning hours. He believed the world was coming to an end and walked around the windows trying to convince his almost ex-wife to go with him to Costa Rica, where he thought they could escape the virus. After a few hours, Gretchen relented and allowed David into the house. That evening, a patrolling police officer noticed David, visibly nervous and sweaty, strutting around outside a Riviera Beach restaurant and at one point approaching a group of teenage girls. The officer noticed David's license plate, partially covered with black duct tape, and headed toward him. David claimed that his 12-year-old stepdaughter had taped the license plate and began to act even more nervous. The man ignored the police officer's orders not to move, yanked open the door of his truck and began searching for something under the seat. Fearing what would happen next, the officer pointed a gun at David and ordered him to the ground. When the officers looked under the driver's seat where David was trying to reach, they found a large knife.
David was arrested for resisting arrest, but posted bail a few days later and was released. The pandemic was gaining momentum. In the early 20s of March, some states began banning people from leaving their homes. Gretchen, like everyone else, was trying to figure out how to live in the new realities. She shared informational videos about the virus and how to stay safe,
posting memes and jokes mocking the absurdity of the new normal.
On Thursday, March 19th, she posted a quote from a meditation blog. "When there is chaos around you, the wisest choice is to create peace within yourself." After that, her profile was no longer active, and she stopped answering calls and messages. This moment divided life into before and after for all of her near and dear ones. Texting from Gretchen Anthony's phone to friends and family began on March 23, 2020. Over the course of several days, friends and family received a series of messages from Gretchen stating that she was quarantined at home, then describing her deteriorating condition and hospitalization in the emergency room at Jupiter Medical Center. Another message claimed she was transferred to another CDC facility that did not exist. On March 24th, Don Paris, Gretchen's supervisor and friend, received a message from her saying, "I tested positive for coronavirus early this morning. This is bad news, but I am at a coronavirus CDC treatment center that only handles COVID cases. The good news is that my blood type can potentially be used in treatment. I'm not sure if you remember when I said I have a strain of mad cow disease in my blood. Well, that strain is important for gathering more answers and finding a cure. For safety reasons, Dr. Sinclair and her team strongly encourage program participants to keep contact only with immediate family members. I chose my mom. Gretchen's ex-husband, who had his 12-year-old stepdaughter visiting, also began receiving messages from Gretchen saying that the Center for Disease Control and Prevention, CDC, had quarantined her. She could be placed in a medically induced coma, and she would no longer be able to write. Jeff Dreyer didn't believe these reports. He was confused by the multiple text errors and abbreviations. The manner of speech in the messages sounded more like David Anthony, and Jeff became alarmed. In addition, it bothered everyone who received these messages that no one, not even his daughter Gretchen, never called. Friends couldn't imagine Gretchen dying of anything, since at 51 she was in good shape and took her health very seriously. When calls to the medical center confirmed that Gretchen Anthony had not been admitted there, the family along with friends decided to contact the police to check if their loved one was doing well. Gretchen Anthony's boss told police that she was last at work on March 20th, and when he called her insurance company to see if she was receiving medical care anywhere, they said there had been no referrals under her policy to process treatment. Jupiter Police Detective Jared Kennerson contacted Jupiter Medical Center and found that the hospital's records did not mention anything about such a patient. In fact, police found that Gretchen had not been to Jupiter Medical Center since 2008. Police checked the medical center parking lot and found a Mini Cooper in the parking lot. In the car, Gretchen's purse was lying in the most visible spot, causing patrol officers to become concerned. Officers went to the missing person's home. What they discovered at Gretchen's home was alarming and turned a simple visit into a potential murder investigation. A neighbor approached the officers and gave them the disturbing information. Early Saturday morning on Saturday, March 21st, I heard a very desperate female screaming as if she was being attacked. And then I heard her scream, "No!" And then I heard something like, "It hurts. Stop." The scream was really serious. Unfortunately, Gretchen didn't call emergency services. Some people are just wary of calling the police. Officers became even more concerned when another neighbor told them he later noticed a soapy substance leaking from under Gretchen's garage door. The front door leading to the garage was locked, and the key was broken in the deadbolt. When officers were able to open the door, they detected a strong, pungent odor of cleaning product in the garage. Using body cameras, patrol officers searched the house several times. They found evidence of a violent struggle, a broken picture frame, shards of glass on Gretchen's bed, and a soiled towel. Officers noticed that surveillance cameras inside the house had been removed from the walls,
possibly to destroy compromising evidence, and sent a request to a service provider to recover the footage from the cloud. Police officials made inquiries and discovered that a neighbor had taken a photo of a black Nissan pickup truck parked outside Gretchen's home after the terrifying screams. The exact same pickup truck was owned by Gretchen's almost ex-husband, David Anthony, who suddenly decided to leave. His mother told police that her son packed up his truck and hit the road on Tuesday, March 24, 2020, saying he was going to Costa Rica. Their suspicions were heightened when they saw on video taken in the parking lot of Jupiter Medical Center, where Gretchen's car was found, a Mini Cooper pull into a parking space, and a tall figure, the height of David Anthony, emerge from the vehicle. Investigators began tracking Gretchen's cell phone and found that it was registered in the Pensacola, Florida area. As would later be confirmed, David had driven just 600 miles to Pensacola, Florida's westernmost city. After stopping at a couple of local pawn shops to sell some women's jewelry, he and his dog, Kobe, continued west, stopping for one night at a hotel in Pecos, Texas, before settling in Las Cruces, New Mexico. While 2,000 miles away, David contacted detectives and reported that Gretchen was alive and in no danger. He explained that his spouse had provided him with a written statement, which he read aloud over the phone. According to the statement, Gretchen discovered financial crimes at her job and fled Florida with David, fearing for her life. The statement also said she also fled from her first ex-husband, Jeff. Detectives didn't believe it and continued to investigate. They tracked Gretchen and David's cell phone signals, which indicated that the two phones were together. Expecting the worst, detectives obtained a warrant to impound the truck on March 29th and enlisted the help of Las Cruces police to arrange a traffic stop. Las Cruces police detained David, seized the truck and property, including his phone and Gretchen's phone, but they still didn't have enough evidence to call him in for questioning. He was allowed to just walk away. On March 30th, 2020, Jupiter police obtained electronic records from Gretchen's home, and investigators finally learned the truth. On the morning of March 21st, David lurked silently on the porch overlooking the back of the garage. In his hands, he held an elongated object. 6 minutes later, Gretchen appeared in the footage. The video shows David forcibly driving her into the garage, and a scream can be heard over the footage. First, Gretchen yelled to the Amazon Alexa device in the garage, "Alexa, turn on the lights in the garage." The surveillance camera audio then captured a muffled thud and Gretchen's muffled screams. She then yelled to Alexa again, "Alexa, call 911. Gretchen didn't know that unless she specifically programmed her smart speaker to call 911, the device wouldn't call the police in an emergency. After a while, David's face appeared in the frame, his hands wearing gloves. In one shot, Gretchen's bloody head could be seen as he walked around the garage. Investigators have seen enough. On March 30th, detectives get a warrant for David's arrest. Gretchen's case went from being a missing persons case to a murder investigation. Detective Kennerson rushed to Las Cruces. Shortly before midnight, March 31st, police arrested David outside a convenience store. Jupiter detectives questioned him at the state police headquarters in Las Cruces, New Mexico. They had one goal, to get David to reveal the whereabouts of Gretchen's body, and the detectives failed. David claimed that Gretchen was alive. In fact, during the interrogation, David Anthony made this claim 35 times. Detectives even tried using a voice recording of Gretchen's daughter, whom David really loved. With her father's permission, the girl recorded her request. "David, it's Ava. I love you. I'm scared. I miss my mom," she told him. "I need to know where my mom is. Please do the right thing and tell me where my mom is. Please. I love you." Detectives played the tape to David, but he remained indifferent. While behind bars, he refused to say anything about what had happened to Gretchen. In his typical restraint, he remained silent for months. David knew it would be difficult for the prosecutor to get a conviction without Gretchen's body. He was charged with second-degree murder and extradited to Florida. While David was in custody in Palm Beach County, Florida, a grand jury indicted him for kidnapping and upgraded the murder charge from second-degree to first-degree murder. This was a turning point, and in December 2020, after 8 months in prison, the criminal took a plea deal with the prosecutor. The fact is that he could have faced the death penalty for first-degree murder.
Under the terms of the deal, David would plead guilty to second-degree murder in exchange for a 38-year prison sentence. The main condition of the deal was that he would lead investigators to Gretchen's body. On December 21st, 9 months after Gretchen Anthony disappeared, David Anthony admitted what everyone already knew. He killed his wife. Gretchen's body was found wrapped in a blanket 3 miles from her home, in the woods behind a Walmart store and near a nursing home.
Investigators determined she died from stab wounds to her neck and torso. There were several defensive wounds. She was fighting for her life. At the sentencing hearing, David Anthony said the COVID-19 pandemic was a contributing factor to his crime because he saw the pandemic as Armageddon from which he had to flee. My delusions saw the COVID pandemic as a prophecy of the end of the world, an Armageddon that I felt compelled to avoid at all costs. Under the terms of the plea agreement, David Anthony was sentenced to 38 years in prison on January 14, 2021. He is currently serving his sentence at the Martin Correctional Institution in Florida.
This story is about a woman whose life is filled with lies from beginning to end. You will learn how the unscrupulous deceiver ends up in pursuit of big money and how many human destinies it can affect. Michelle grew up in the town of Hurst in the suburbs of Dallas, Texas. She had a younger sister, Laura. The girl's mother left home in search of a better life, so the upbringing of children was the father. It was not easy for a man to raise 2 daughters alone. He survived on occasional earnings at a construction site and often relied on alcohol. In search of easy money, he repeatedly thought up and implemented devious plans for profit. He would take a job at one factory or another and deliberately injure himself in order to obtain insurance money compensation. The fraud scheme worked, but not for long. With the help of CCTV cameras at one of the workplaces, the scheme was uncovered, and Michelle and Laura's father was sent into custody. Michelle grew up in a world of lies, deceit, and manipulation from childhood. This was her normal life, from which she wanted to escape by any means possible. But it is impossible to escape from herself, because lies have already become a part of her life, and she simply did not know how to live differently. The girl dreams of growing up faster to get out of the hated poverty. At the age of 15, Michelle looks very spectacular, a petite brunette of athletic build. She attracts a lot of interest from guys both of her own and older age. Even then, Michelle realizes that with the help of her feminine power and charm, she can easily manage to manipulate any men in her environment in order to get what she wants. So in her life begins a series of love relationships with different men. At the age of 17, Michelle drops out of school and marries for the first time to 16-year-old Kenneth O'Brien. She informs the boyfriend that she is expecting a baby. Kenneth, taking full responsibility for his young wife and future child, enlists in the army. The couple moves frequently. 2 more children are born to them in this marriage. One city is replaced by another. Temporary housing of the military was not the limit of Michelle's dreams. Such a life does not suit her, and after 5 years, she leaves, naming the reason for divorce beatings and cheating on the part of her husband. Michelle returns to her native Hearst. In front of relatives and friends, she appears as a victim of domestic violence and receives the necessary support and begins to organize her life anew. After a while, she falls in love with her former classmate Brandon. The young man is head over heels in love with Michelle and gladly accepted her 3 children. The lovers prepare for the wedding. However, on the eve of the wedding, Michelle infuriates Brandon. It turns out that the girl did not divorce her first husband. She was very afraid to talk to him about divorce because of the abuse, so she did not send the documents. With the help of a lawyer, this issue was quickly settled and the couple was able to marry in 1994. At first, family life flowed calmly and measured. Brandon was engaged in the development of his IT company, and Michelle worked as a dental assistant. But quiet family life was not the limit of Michelle's dreams. She has always needed more. She starts bringing home all sorts of dental equipment and supplies. The cash doesn't fit in her purse. Brandon suspected something wrong. Eventually, Michelle was caught stealing. It was only by luck that a trial was avoided. But Brandon's trust issues with his wife were just beginning. Responding to neighbors' reports that cars were frequently arriving at the house while he was at work, Brandon installed a tape recorder in several rooms of the house. Listening to the tape, he heard various men visiting their home throughout the day. Brandon does his own little investigation and learns that the reason for the divorce in Michelle's first marriage was her numerous infidelities, not her husband's beatings, as she told everyone. Brandon's patience broke, and he demanded a divorce. Michelle was furious that Brandon initiated the divorce, and while he was at work, she got back at him. "I had a very nice saltwater aquarium with thousands of dollars worth of fish in it," Brandon says. "She poured Comet into it and killed all the fish." But Michelle didn't stop there. Brandon also had a beloved dog named Domino. Michelle stuffed the dog with sleeping pills, which led to the death of the living creature. Michelle put Domino to sleep. "If you're shocked at this point, we've only scratched the surface," Brandon says. "It was a nightmare that wouldn't stop. You can't make that girl go away." Unfortunately, Brandon learned the truth about Michelle when his own marriage was completely destroyed. Everything Michelle did with Brandon Dixon pales in comparison to her adventures with other men. It was later revealed that John Paul Ray, also a student at the high school Michelle attended in Hearst, was the father of her first child. Instead of revealing this information to John, she told Kenneth O'Brien that the child was his, forcing him to marry her. Kenneth, for 13 years, thought the eldest son was his own. John later told police that Kenneth paid child support from age 5 to 18 and did not know he was not the father. After Brandon and Michelle divorced, she moved in with John, the father of her first child. They lived in a common-law marriage for 8 years. Their relationship came to an abrupt end when John began to suspect his wife of cheating. Michelle didn't deny it. She confirmed the affair on the side. John moved out, leaving most of Michelle's possessions. Michelle's next love was Greg Williams. They were both not so young anymore. Both had a history of past marital failures. The man was married twice and had a daughter. After Greg and Katie divorced in 2003, the couple agreed to share custody of their common daughter, Taylor. However, there was no formal agreement on child support, because the former spouses had a good relationship. Rich, successful, and generous Greg was a perfect match for Michelle. In 2007, Greg and Michelle had a common daughter, Michaela. A year later, they got married. Their marriage was like the American dream. Money, children, love, it was all in abundance. Michelle seemed to have made it through the thorns to the stars and got the life she had always dreamed of. Greg Williams held his family in very high esteem. He grew up in a family with fierce principles and achieved everything on his own from an early age. He loved sports and was a martial arts black belt. In addition to his love of exercise, Greg was also a fan of guns. Both he and Michelle had guns that they kept in their home in Keller. Michelle's gun, a Silver Point .40 caliber pistol, was kept in a safe, but Greg kept his gun, a black Liebherr .45 caliber, always loaded in a case under his bedside table. The couple was determined to make their marriage a success. They threw birthday parties for their children from other marriages at their home in Keller. Michelle's adult children would have barbecues and swim parties. Very often the house was full of friends. But despite the picturesque suburban home and a precocious daughter, Greg and Michelle were not the classic American couple. They met through an online community for bondage, domination, sadism, and masochism, and their wild adult house parties led to numerous complaints from neighbors. Without making the matter public, the couple decides to move out. The night before, Michelle and Greg had been unable to sleep for a long time. They were preparing to buy a new house for $4.5 million. They emotionally discussed the upcoming event. Greg stayed in the bedroom alone. Michelle went out to her crying daughter and fell asleep with her in the room. On October 13, 2011, at 4:40 a.m., an emergency call came in. A crying woman screamed into the phone that she and her husband had been attacked by a robber. She was injured, and her husband had been shot. Within minutes, police arrived at the scene of the tragedy. Inside the home, detectives found a television on full volume and a baby sleeping on the couch. Michelle's daughter was sound asleep and unaffected in any way by the attack that occurred. The woman's behavior alerted police officers. She was behaving rather strangely and did not look like she had just experienced a burglary. Soon, the gated community was filled with police cars, detectives, and forensic experts. The lot was cordoned off, and police searched every inch of the nearly 5,000-square-foot home. Michelle was fully dressed, had her hair styled, and was acting very calm. She told police she was asleep, but her clothing and demeanor said otherwise. As the only witness, Michelle was taken to the Keller Township Police Station for questioning. After several hours of talking to police and investigators, Michelle's story began to fall apart like a house of cards. According to the woman, the intruder, dressed in all black, hit her on the head with a wrench. She fell from the blow, but was conscious and heard a gunshot. The stranger then fled through the back door of the house. Michelle Williams's account did not match what police saw at the scene. Greg Williams was shot in the head while lying in bed. A .45 caliber handgun, presumably used by the intruder, was found near the back door next to a wrench. There were no fingerprints on either weapon. Neither was found to show any signs of forced entry. The family's valuables and money were untouched. Examined CCTV footage from a neighbor's camera showed that only one car had entered the gated community in the hours before the crime. Police confirmed that the car belonged to a newspaper delivery man. To confuse the investigation, Michelle came up with a version of the attack. She hit herself with a wrench and made their large house look like the scene of the attack. But detectives did their due diligence and noticed a number of details that didn't add up. Michelle Williams was fully dressed, her hair was styled, and she had fresh makeup on her face. It gave the impression as if she was waiting for someone. The gun used during the crime was found in the house without any fingerprints, and the final detail that proved Michelle's lie was the $20,000 in cash that was not stolen in the robbery. Michelle had no explanation for why a successful businessman and devoted father decided to take his own life, but she was able to explain her behavior. Michelle claimed she wanted to spare their young daughter the bitter truth about her father's self-inflicted death. She admitted to police that she wiped down the gun and washed Greg's hands to cover up fingerprints before desperately staging a home invasion and calling emergency services. As bizarre as that explanation was, it became obvious to police why no evidence was found in the house. Michelle admitted to wiping the crime scene with bleach and hitting herself in the face with a wrench to present a more realistic picture of the attack. From the beginning, Keller police doubted the credibility of Michelle's testimony. But at the time, no physical evidence was presented linking her to the crime. Michelle was arrested for perjury, but was soon released home. Around 5 p.m. on the evening of her husband's murder, Michelle went to her sister Laura's home and did not mention the late Greg's name once during the evening. Michelle cried from time to time, but it didn't seem sincere, her sister Laura Cusick said when questioned by police. The morning after the tragedy, Michelle woke up in a great mood. She was beautifully dressed, with her hair styled and makeup on. In high spirits, the recent widow went for breakfast at a famous restaurant that served the best pancakes with syrup. While the police were looking into the theory that Greg had taken his own life, struggling to find a motive and obtain credible evidence of it, Michelle herself presented the investigation with first a motive and then evidence of her guilt. Going through the documents from the first interrogation, the investigators were attracted by Michelle's words that she didn't care about a single penny. But her actions proved otherwise. After Greg's death, Michelle quickly begins liquidating assets from family companies and spending large sums of money. She cashes checks through Greg's IT company. The amount of checks cashed is not disclosed anywhere. In all likelihood, we are talking about a lot of money. After receiving cash from the sale of the Blueberries frozen yogurt store in Keller, Michelle made one of her biggest blunders. She went to the insurance company, hoping to get a payout on Greg's life insurance policy. Michelle was the sole beneficiary on Greg's life insurance policy, which was taken out on August 12, 2011, almost exactly 2 months before he was killed. But one important fact the woman missed. According to the terms of the insurance policy, Greg's death was not an insured event because he left his life voluntarily, and at the last moment, she was denied the money. The desire to get the insured sum of $600,000 was the main motive for the crime. Later, another important fact of financial fraud comes to light that casts suspicion on the widow. Fictitious financial documents for a mortgage loan were used to purchase the house that Greg and Michelle had been preparing for on the eve of his death. The account numbers were intentionally changed, and the lender did not immediately notice the elaborate fraud. When Greg died, Michelle canceled a meeting with the mortgage company, and the fake account was not discussed until it caught the attention of the police. Michelle, confident of her impunity, writes a check for $18,000 to attorney Kenneth Wincorn and takes a week-long vacation to Grapevine with her children. During the 3-month investigation into Greg Williams' death, police were able to unravel his wife's web of deceit. An autopsy was performed on Greg, which proves that the man was shot from a range of 12 to 18 inches. Moreover, the toxicology examination conducted provided a report proving that Greg had a large dose of sleeping pills in his system at the time of his death. Also, the police determined that there was no assault on the house. Mrs. Williams sedated her husband and shot him from a foot away after turning up the volume on the television. Daughter Michelle, who was asleep in her room, did not hear anything. On November 3, 2011, based on the Tarrant County Medical Examiner's report, Greg Williams' death was officially ruled a homicide. Michelle Williams was arrested on January 9th as she was on her way to a fitness center. She was charged with murder, tampering with evidence, and making a false statement to police. Michelle was both the only witness to the crime and the only suspect. Bail was set at $522,000 to be released from custody pending a court hearing. But Michelle spent a week in custody and was released on $85,000. Dressed in gym clothes, Michelle walked out of jail with a GPS monitor and under the arm of attorney Kenneth Wincorn, who was now officially representing her. Greg's first wife, Kathy, was furious when she found out that attorney Wincorn was defending Michelle. That money she paid him was part of Greg's estate, and it should never have gone to pay the legal bills of the woman who was accused of killing him. Online court records list Kenneth Wincorn as the attorney for Katie and Greg's divorce in 2003, and Wincorn's name and signature appear on legal documents regarding the custody agreement for their shared daughter Taylor in 2008. However, Kenneth Wincorn's defense of collusion with Michelle Williams will be exonerated by providing evidence. The divorce was handled by his company, and he personally never represented Greg. Kenneth Wincorn said he first learned of Greg's murder from an IT company employee. It was very shocking, Wincorn says, adding that Michelle later sought his help. After her plot to cash in on Greg's death is foiled, Michelle Williams changes her name to Shelley and appears as a fitness guru hoping to start a new life. On Facebook, Shelley publicly announced her relationship with Gene Wallace, a friend of her oldest son, a man nearly 15 years younger than her. Shelley and Gene opened a fitness club in Bedford and heavily promoted it online. Armed with an ankle bracelet with a GPS tracker, Michelle spent the next few months enjoying her new boyfriend, fitness classes, and court hearings. She often appeared in court dressed for a night out on the town, wearing miniskirts, knee-length boots, and deep-cut blouses. She never mourned Greg's death for a second, says Greg's ex-wife, Kathy. Rob Conover was friends with Greg Williams for more than 20 years and attended many of Michelle's hearings. He recalls how she deftly manipulated police officers at the courthouse, making them see her as an innocent woman in need of protection. On October 9, 2013, 45-year-old Michelle Williams took a plea deal with the county and pleaded guilty to tampering with evidence and deadly conduct. She will receive 18 years in prison for tampering with evidence and for deadly dangerous conduct, a third-degree felony that only exists in a few states. Although Michelle admitted that she cleaned the gun and Greg's body, the absence of her DNA at the scene raised doubts about whether the first-degree murder charge would stick. Things can go differently. Play big, win big, or lose big, Michelle said in an interview. With the plea bargain, I expect to do a couple years, and after that, I'll be out on parole. But in February 2014, Michelle Williams, in an interview, suddenly changes her testimony and says she is not guilty of the crime. The judge immediately rescinds the plea bargain and sets a date for the first trial. Opening arguments have begun in the trial of a Texas woman, dubbed by the media as Keller's Black Widow, who was accused of intentionally targeting her husband in 2011 for an insurance payoff. Michelle Williams, 45, was charged with the crime. In court, prosecutors described the crime as a clearly planned scheme of acts to profit from Greg's substantial life insurance policy. In their opening statement, prosecutors told jurors that Mrs. Williams shot her husband in the head after drugging him with sleeping pills beforehand in order to collect on his life insurance policy. The motive was money, time-tested money, Greed, Assistant District Attorney Jack Strickland said in court. Although Michelle admitted that she cleaned the gun and Greg's body, the absence of her DNA at the scene raised doubts about whether the first-degree murder charge would stick. In response to an interview request, Michelle's attorney released a statement on her behalf. Attorney Kenneth Wincorn described the difficulties in the case caused by the spotlessly clean crime scene. The prosecution struggled to prove a premeditated crime, disregarding the fact that there was no DNA from the suspect. In repeated searches, cleaning products were found, but it stands to reason that Michelle's fingerprints were on them, since the products were in the house where she lived and did the cleaning. If the jury concludes that Michelle tampered with evidence of Greg's death, making it look like the man had spontaneously passed away and then cleaned up the crime scene by hiding evidence and then lying about it, she will get a life sentence. But if Michelle is sentenced as scheduled on April 21st, no jury will ever get a chance to hear the whole story and decide on the appropriate punishment. Through careful questioning of the Williams couple's friends and acquaintances, information regularly emerged about the unfavorable environment that had prevailed in their family for a long period of time. According to the studied correspondence in social networks and messengers, it was found that the couple quarreled very often, and the reason was finances. At the trial, prosecutors said that in the hours leading up to the violent death, Greg Williams argued with his wife over their finances and even slapped her for spending a large amount of money that had been set aside as a down payment on a house. But Michelle Williams' defense argued that Greg Williams had taken his own life and that the successful business owner needed his wife alive, not dead. According to defense attorney Clay Graham, Greg Williams often suffered from depression and regularly used sedatives and steroids. On the eve of the crime, he was allegedly severely depressed due to the loss of his grandmother and best friend, who ironically had taken his own life. Defense counsel told the court that when Michelle Williams found her husband dead with a self-inflicted gunshot wound, she panicked and in a fit of fear began to cover up the tragedy without realizing it. She had one goal: to protect her 4-year-old daughter from psychological trauma by hiding the truth from her. Michelle Williams never once changed herself, presenting at court hearings in different images, with styled hair and manicure. At one hearing, the defendant, dressed in an off-white blouse and black vest, showed little emotion throughout most of the trial, but did not forget to wipe away tears during a presentation of photographs showing images of the body of murdered Greg Williams. The court also heard testimony from Michelle Williams' adult son, Andrew O'Brien, who said his mother, Michelle Williams, asked him to help frame Greg Williams' ex-wife, Kathy. She planned to blame her for Greg's death using the motive of unreconciled differences over the custody of their daughter, Taylor. But that plan was a failure from the get-go. After all, there was never any disagreement between the former spouses about the custody of their daughter, and it would have been very difficult to prove otherwise. Asked about his reaction to his mother's unusual request, 26-year-old Andrew O'Brien said he was very shocked by such a proposal and thought she was having a mental breakdown. Michelle confronted her sons at the trial when they testified against her. The jury later found Michelle guilty of felony tampering with physical evidence. According to the show, she provided false information that she was pregnant with twins, hoping to delay her sentencing. But this version was not confirmed and the verdict was announced. Michelle's acting abilities and her natural charm, which she tried her best to demonstrate during each hearing, did not spare her from a harsh sentence. Sandwiched between a scenario in which she was a cold-blooded criminal and one in which she was portrayed as a deranged wife and mother acting on impulse, Michelle chose the latter. "He did it," she said, wrapping her arms around her head. Michelle even congratulated the detective on solving the case. "I wouldn't have gotten through the day," she said. "You've won." Even before the police admitted to doubting Michelle's story, few believed Greg had lost his life. He had too much to live for, and he knew all too well how much pain an untimely death causes. Kathy Williams believes that Michelle's relationship with Gene Wallace began when Greg was still alive and may be the elusive motive for this crime. If Greg had found out she was sleeping with her little boyfriend, he would have dumped her, and she would have gotten nothing. Katie says, "Greg was willing to put up with a lot, but he wasn't willing to put up with cheating." "She's ruined so many lives you can't even imagine," Brandon says. "She's a professional manipulator. If the courts had gone further and interviewed all of us, things could have gone in a different direction. Michelle was sentenced to 60 years in prison. The judge also ruled that she would have to serve a minimum of 30 years before being eligible for parole. Michelle currently remains incarcerated at Mountain View Prison in Gatesville, Texas. Michelle Williams is a felon and fraudster who is currently serving time in prison for all of her willful acts. She has never shown remorse for her actions and still refuses to take full responsibility for her crime.
An unequal marriage and a crime for millions. People who are madly in love with money but do not know how to earn it themselves can be extremely cunning and dangerous. They easily cross the boundaries of morality, ethics, and law. For them, there are no friends, relatives, or loved ones, and they are capable of any betrayal, even a crime, for money. Such was the case with a seemingly charming and sweet woman named Celeste. The case of Celeste and Stephen Beard in the early 2000s shocked the United States of America and was later widely covered in the media of other countries. The story began in a typical manner. An elderly millionaire decided to marry a young beauty who worked for him as a maid. Friends, relatives, and business partners advised Mr. Beard against this step, but he was blinded by love and genuinely believed that his feelings were mutual. Stephen was the fourth of 5 legal husbands of this cunning and greedy woman. She never loved him, but only saw him as a source of her own enrichment. In various ways, the wife forced the millionaire to change the conditions of their marriage contract so that, in case of his death, she would receive as much money and property as possible. To hasten her husband's demise while deflecting suspicion from herself, Celeste used a woman who was in love with her. Early years of Stephen Beard. Stephen Beard was born on August 11, 1924, in Dallas, Texas. He was the only child of a woman named Dolores, but never knew his biological father. He was always very close to his mother, who worked multiple jobs to provide everything necessary for her son. Stephen's childhood and youth coincided with the difficult times of the Great Depression and World War II. After finishing high school, the young man tried for some time to find a job in advertising, but soon realized that without education, it would be very difficult to get a good job, so he studied to become a marketer. However, he did not have time to apply his knowledge and practice, as he went to war, serving in the Navy until 1945. During the war years, Stephen gained an engineering specialty, but despite this, he could not find a decent job in peacetime. He managed to get a position as a sales consultant in a small shoe store in his hometown of Dallas, where he earned a very modest salary, barely enough for the essentials. Nevertheless, Stephen later called that period the happiest in his life, because he was young, full of strength, enthusiasm, and faith in a bright future. Most importantly, during his time working in the store, he met the main woman in his life, his wife, Alice Adams. The girl was 2 years younger than him, possessed striking looks, a slender figure, and was trying to build a career in the modeling business, but abandoned her ambitions to devote herself to her family. The young couple, deeply in love, got married in 1948, just a couple of months after meeting, and a year later, their eldest daughter was born. In 1950, Alice gave her husband a long-awaited son, and 3 years later, another boy was born. Their family was strong and loving, where everyone cared for and supported each other. From janitor to millionaire. In the early days of regular electronic television broadcasting, Stephen dreamed of working in the industry, but his path was challenging and filled with obstacles. In the late 1940s, he managed to get a job at one of the studios, but only as a janitor. However, the young man did not give up, continued searching, and soon luck smiled upon him. He was offered a chance to try his hand as a host of an entertainment program on a radio station, and he eagerly accepted the offer. After several years of hard work, Beard became the producer of a popular television program. His income rapidly increased, and he felt right at home in the field of mass communications and information. Stephen became an excellent specialist in advertising and entertainment content promotion, developing new ideas and brilliantly bringing them to life. He worked with many different people, made many useful connections, constantly improved himself, and strove to improve the world. By the mid-1950s,
Stephen was successfully engaged not only in advertising and producing TV projects, but also invested the money he earned in real estate and started selling cars. By the age of 40, Stephen had earned his first $1 million and had no plans to stop there. In 1974, at the age of 50, Beard managed to win a tender together with the television company he founded. The businessman, along with his wife and 3 children, moved to Austin, the capital of Texas, where they bought a luxurious mansion with a large pool. Their home was located in one of the most prestigious areas of the city, covering almost 5,000 square meters. The couple joined an elite local club, membership in which cost them over $50,000 a year, but by that time, such an amount was insignificant for them. The Beards achieved incredible heights, raised 3 children, gave them an excellent education, and now simply enjoyed life. Alice continued to take great care of her appearance, exercised, and despite her age and having 3 children, maintained a slender figure. Meanwhile, Stephen rapidly gained weight and refused to do anything about it. He joked that his physique matched his social status and income level. All his wife's attempts to get him to exercise and watch his diet were met with promises to consider her advice. By the early 1990s, Beard's fortune had exceeded $10 million. The businessman and his family had virtually everything money could buy. The couple acquired their own yacht, traveled extensively, doted on their grandchildren, and were incredibly happy. It seemed that this happiness would last forever, but suddenly, tragedy struck their home. Illness and death of Alice Beard. In early 1993, Alice sought medical help due to severe migraines that had been constantly tormenting her. A thorough examination revealed a cancerous tumor in her brain. Treatment began immediately. One of the best neurosurgeons operated on Mrs. Beard, and she was prescribed expensive medications that were hard to obtain. Her husband spared no expense on innovative therapy, which offered some hope for recovery. Alice's diagnosis was a shock to the entire family, but they supported her and believed in the best. It seemed that their love, care, and advanced treatment technologies yielded results, and after 6 months, she went into remission. In August of that year, they went on a cruise to relax, celebrate their 45th wedding anniversary, and the victory over the illness. It was a wonderful, romantic, but unfortunately, their last vacation together. By late September, the insidious disease returned with renewed vigor and began to progress rapidly. Neither the best specialists nor experimental therapy could help Alice. She passed away on October 13, 1993, at the age of 68. For her family, it was an irreparable loss and a pain that nothing could alleviate. Period of depression and new love. After the passing of his beloved wife, Stephen fell into a deep depression. He lost interest in his business affairs, spent a lot of time at the bar of the upscale country club, sitting alone, drinking heavily, and just passing time to avoid returning to his empty, enormous house. By then, his children had long grown up and moved away, and his grandchildren only visited during holidays, leaving the millionaire in the mansion surrounded only by his numerous housekeepers, cooks, gardeners, and other staff. The man was visibly withering away. As a family man, he desperately needed a kindred spirit, care, and companionship. His relatives and friends were convinced that he needed a woman who would support him and be a source of comfort during such a difficult time. However, Stephen was not ready for a new relationship. At that moment, he couldn't even imagine loving someone else again. In early 1994, Beard met an attractive young woman named Celeste Martinez, who had started working as a waitress at the country club's restaurant a couple of weeks before their first meeting. She was a pretty, smiling blonde, very sociable, and able to attract attention. She was divorced and was fighting her ex-husband for custody of their twin daughters. Celeste was experiencing financial difficulties, had many debts, and told pitiful stories about her tough life. Stephen became a sympathetic listener and quickly grew fond of this girl. He genuinely felt sorry for her, wanted to help her out of her difficult situation, and offered her a job as a maid in his home, which she gladly accepted.
Thus began a rather predictable romance between the elderly millionaire and the cunning beauty, who was almost 40 years younger than him. Who is Celeste Beard? Celeste Mary Johnson, maiden name matching her fifth husband's surname, has carried several surnames over time: Ratcher, Wolf, Martinez, Johnson, but became globally notorious under the surname of her fourth husband, Stephen Beard. She was born on February 13, 1963, in Culver City, California. Nothing is known about her biological parents, as her mother abandoned her immediately after she was born. At 2 days old, she was adopted by Nancy and Edwin Johnson. The couple had spent many years unsuccessfully trying to have their own children, but Nancy had repeated miscarriages, which led to a nervous breakdown that later developed into prolonged depression and resulted in a mental disorder. In the late 1950s, the Johnsons adopted 2 boys. In 1963, they took in Celeste, and a year and a half later, they adopted another girl. Over the years, Nancy's mental condition worsened and became increasingly unstable. The couple frequently argued, and their adopted children were unwilling witnesses to these fights. Nancy sank deeper into depression, repeatedly attempted to end her life, and even wanted to harm the children. Many years later, Celeste recounted that her most frightening childhood memory was bath time when she and her sister were in the bathtub, and their mother suddenly pushed their heads underwater, holding them there for a while before letting go. Nancy claimed she was just rinsing their hair, but the sisters were convinced their mother had tried to drown them, but then reconsidered. After this incident, Nancy was admitted to a psychiatric clinic following another nervous breakdown, leaving Edwin to care for the 4 children. He tried to be a good father and take care of his charges, but in her teenage years, Celeste openly accused him of constant molestation and abuse, which she claimed began when she was only 11. However, her words were hard to trust, as this story repeatedly changed, gained different details, and later, the blonde even alleged that her older brothers also committed acts of intimate violence against her. Pathological liar. Soon, the Johnsons separated and began a court battle for custody of their adopted children. Nancy claimed her husband was an alcoholic and accused him of domestic violence. Edwin, on the other hand, argued that the children couldn't be left with their mother because she was dangerous, and due to her mental issues, could harm herself and them at any moment. Celeste didn't want to stay with either of her adoptive parents, but in court, she testified against her father, accusing him of molestation, aggression, assault, and even armed attack. According to her, when she was a child, Edwin struck her in the head with a knife, causing her to nearly bleed to death. When asked to show the scar, she initially said it was hidden by her hair, then forgot where exactly she had been hit. Eventually, she claimed the scar had disappeared with age. Celeste constantly fabricated stories about her past, portraying herself as a victim. She understood this was the easiest way to attract attention, elicit pity and sympathy from others, and get what she wanted. During her teenage years, Celeste was extremely temperamental, behaved aggressively and sometimes irrationally, leading her to be taken to a psychiatrist. She was never diagnosed, with the conclusion being that it was just a difficult adolescence compounded by an unhealthy family environment. Celeste went through several more foster families, but never settled anywhere. Thanks to her striking appearance and brazen behavior, Celeste was very popular with the opposite gender from a young age. She often skipped school, preferring to spend time with boys in bars or on the beach, and in high school she dropped out altogether. Marriage to Craig Bratcher and birth of twins. At 16, Celeste met a young man named Craig Bratcher, who was only a year and a half older than her. They quickly started living together, and less than a year later, Celeste became pregnant. In December 1980, the couple had a modest wedding, and soon after, their twin daughters, Jennifer and Christina, were born. The young parents were unprepared for family life, domestic responsibilities, and raising children. They constantly argued, and Celeste didn't want to change her lifestyle. She spent her time in bars and clubs, leaving the children with Craig. She repeatedly accused Craig of domestic violence, assault, and forcing intimacy,
trying to portray herself as a victim, secure a divorce, and receive monthly payments from her ex-husband. Celeste again accused her husband of abuse when he caught her in bed with a lover and threatened to end their lives. She managed to get Craig sent to jail for several months, although no one was actually harmed during that incident. The couple divorced in the spring of 1982. Celeste filed for child support and even obtained a restraining order against her ex-husband. However, she continued to regularly leave the children with him so they wouldn't interfere with her social life. New fleeting marriages. After the divorce, Celeste wandered from one rented room to another, living off alimony and welfare, stubbornly refusing to work. She constantly took men to court, accusing them of harassment and violence, hoping to get some compensation. Celeste had no interest in her children and simply gave them to a foster family to avoid having them interfere with her lifestyle. When her ex-husband found out, he was shocked. He managed to gain custody of the children and took them in. Soon after, Celeste convinced him to try living together again. He agreed, but the reunion was short-lived. A couple of months later, Celeste again accused him of violence and took him to court. Craig even agreed to take a lie detector test, which showed he was telling the truth. After the breakup, the parents split the children. Jennifer stayed with her father, while Christina went with her mother. In 1986, Celeste married for the second time to a serviceman named Harold Wolf. But this marriage didn't last long. Despite Harold treating her and her daughter well, life with the unstable Celeste proved unbearable. She constantly argued, threatened to end her life, and even called Harold's superiors, complaining about him, nearly ruining his career. Almost immediately after the divorce, Celeste married again. Her third husband was a wealthy top manager named Jimmy Martinez. The couple bought a spacious house in Austin, but Celeste nearly bankrupted her new husband by spending his money recklessly. When he realized she had drained his accounts and put him in debt, he tried to talk to her, but she cut her wrist with scissors. After that incident, Celeste was sent for mandatory treatment in a psychiatric clinic. The therapy did her some good, and she calmed down a bit, but it didn't save her marriage to Jimmy. She also accused her third husband of domestic violence, but he managed to have all charges dropped. Immediately after that, he filed for divorce. Fraud and incredible luck. In the early 90s, Celeste faced charges of insurance fraud involving her car. She had burned the vehicle in the desert to collect a large payout, but her scam was soon uncovered. A case was opened, but Celeste got incredibly lucky. At the hearing, she encountered a sympathetic judge who sentenced her to community service and a fine equal to the insurance payout instead of prison time. Celeste needed money, so she got a job for the first time in her life. Thanks to her striking appearance and natural charm, she was hired as a waitress at an exclusive country club, where she soon met a widowed millionaire whom she quickly began to woo. Stephen felt sorry for her and invited her to his home, which was a huge stroke of luck for her. Celeste couldn't cook or do housework, so she did everything she could to make others do these tasks for her. She quickly gained the trust of the elderly man, taking advantage of his kindness and generosity. Soon the millionaire started taking his young companion out, introducing her to his friends and partners. By then, Beard's friends were already worried, seeing how cunning and greedy this woman was. However, the businessman wouldn't listen to anyone because he was simply captivated by the beauty. But Celeste was only interested in his money, and the man himself irritated her. In conversations with her daughter, she called him unflattering names, noting that he was fat, old, and disgusting, but she was willing to endure it for financial gain. Even Celeste's ex-husbands, upon learning what was happening, tried to warn the man about who he was involved with, but he didn't believe them. Beard proposed to her, and she naturally accepted right away. However, the businessman's close friends managed to convince him to at least draw up a prenuptial agreement to retain ownership of his property and control his wife's spending. Family life and extravagant spending. On February 18, 1995, the couple officially legalized their relationship. As a wedding gift, Celeste received $500,000, had access to her husband's accounts,
and was set to inherit $1 million upon his death. After the wedding, her daughter Christina moved into Beard's luxurious home, and a year later, after their father ended his life, Jennifer also moved in with her mother and stepfather. Celeste treated her husband with contempt, trying her best to undermine his health and hasten his demise. She made it a tradition to drink strong alcohol at dinner, adding sleeping pills to Stephen's drinks and food so he would fall asleep, allowing her to go out to entertainment venues. Meanwhile, she constantly thought about how to change the prenuptial agreement to maximize her inheritance after Beard's death. She convinced her husband to sell their house and buy another, arguing that she felt uncomfortable living where Stephen had spent many years with Alice. In reality, the scheming blonde wanted property acquired during the marriage. But this wasn't enough, and she began spending money from her millionaire husband's accounts. In the first month of their married life, Celeste spent over $100,000 on entertainment, shopping, and other personal needs. Her husband was bewildered, as no matter how much money he gave her, it was never enough. Moreover, Celeste stole and pawned jewelry that had belonged to the late Alice. When Stephen found out, he was so furious that he wanted not only to divorce her, but also to send her to jail. However, Celeste begged for forgiveness, telling him about her debts and the need to pay a fine for the insurance fraud case. The man believed her, helped pay off her debts, and decided to keep the marriage. Attempted murder. On October 2nd, 1999, around 3 a.m, a frightened man called emergency services, unable to explain what was happening. He said he woke up from a sharp burning pain in his abdomen, saw that his clothes and bed were covered in blood, and his internal organs were literally spilling out, which he was holding in with his hand. The man also said his wife was somewhere in the house, but he couldn't call out to her and was just bleeding out in his bedroom. The caller was Stephen, who truly had no idea what had happened to him, but understood that without immediate help, he would die. Fortunately, within minutes, paramedics and police arrived at the mansion and saw a horrifying scene. An elderly man sat in a chair covered in blood, holding the phone in one hand and trying to stem the blood flow from his abdomen with the other. They asked him if he had recently undergone surgery and if his stitches might have come apart, to which he responded negatively. Soon, Celeste and Christina appeared, seemingly unaware of what was happening, but they remained calm upon learning about the incident. They confirmed that Stephen had not undergone any surgeries, and he was taken to the hospital. This is where things got interesting, as it turned out that the businessman had been shot in the stomach while he slept. In his bedroom, police found a shotgun shell on the floor and sealed the room as a crime scene, declaring it an attempted murder. The first suspect was Mrs. Beard, but she claimed she was in another wing of the mansion at the time, and her daughters corroborated her story. Soon it was revealed that during her second stay in a psychiatric hospital, Celeste had met a woman named Tracy Tarleton, who was also a patient. They quickly developed a close relationship, and Celeste hinted that she would leave her husband if it weren't for him being a tyrant. Tracy took these words as a call to action and decided to remove the obstacle. Investigation, trial, and sentences. Tarleton didn't even try to hide. The shotgun she used was found in her home. Celeste vehemently denied her involvement, claiming that this woman was obsessed with her and acted alone. The accused chose to remain silent. Stephen survived, gradually recovered, and was soon discharged home. However, on January 22, 2000, he suddenly passed away due to a blood clot that had formed after the gunshot wound. Now, Tracy was no longer charged with attempted murder, but with the crime itself. Yet she remained silent until July of that same year, when the newly wealthy widow Celeste married Cole Johnson. Almost immediately after Celeste's fifth marriage, Tracy began testifying against her. She admitted her guilt in Stephen's death, but noted that she was driven to such a desperate act by her lover, who had promised they could be together after the man's demise. However, after eliminating her old husband with someone else's hands and inheriting his fortune, Celeste quickly married another man. Celeste denied all accusations against her, but everyone testified against her in court.
even her own daughters, who confirmed that their mother never loved her fourth husband and wished him dead to inherit his wealth sooner. Tracy made a deal with the prosecution and was sentenced to 10 years in prison. She was released in August 2011. In the spring of 2003, Celeste Johnson was sentenced to life imprisonment with the possibility of parole
no earlier than 40 years. It was revealed that she also planned to get rid of Tarleton and was seeking a criminal to silence her lover and avoid punishment.